Part 19. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 181. Chapter 181 Convey. Dubin stepped aside and said with a smile, "Sixth Master, the Duke of the country has invited me." "Okay, I understand, let's get over it." Luzikin turned to Daong and said, "Tell Rugjuan that I'm going to Wenyuan Pavilion and let him go and do his work first." Daong responded, "I understand." Luzikin followed Dubin to Wenyuan Pavilion and saw that Mrs. Yang was also there. He felt very bored and came forward to greet her with an expressionless face. Mrs. Yang said angrily, "How can I, my step-grandmother, be able to receive such a great gift from you?" The British Duke coughed dissatisfiedly. Mrs. Yang glanced at the British Duke, her face fell and she stopped talking. The British Duke signaled to Luzikin, "Sit down, Zikin." Zikin sat down at the lower end. The British Duke did not mince words and asked directly, "You are back, what are your plans next? Are you going to the military camp or taking part in a scientific examination?" The British Duke's attitude in questioning Mrs. Yang in front of her surprised Luzikin. Luzikin replied lively, "Back to my grandfather, Zikin has made preparations for both. He can go to the military camp or take part in the scientific examination." Mrs. Yang snorted coldly, "Who doesn't know how to speak? Are you prepared with both hands? It seems like you are very capable of speaking." The British father was troubled by Mrs. Yang's problem with her mouth, so he glanced at Mrs. Yang coldly. Mrs. Yang shut her mouth and stopped talking. The British Duke said, "What your grandmother said makes sense. Whether it is going to the military camp or doing scientific research, it is not easy." Luzikin leaned forward and responded, "Zikin understands." The British father-in-law got back to the topic, "Your mother-in-law hasn't returned home yet. I have a few things to discuss with her. Please tell her later." Mrs. Yang snorted coldly and rolled her eyes so hard that she couldn't see the black eyes. Zikin bowed respectfully, "Okay, Grandpa, please speak." The British Duke said, "First of all, it is still a matter of adoption. For the future plans of the British Duke's government, I have carefully considered it and hope to adopt Xiren into your grandma's name. You have persuaded you to be a mother, as the lady of the British government, you must know the general." Luzikin listened but did not answer. Seeing that Luzikin did not object, the British public felt much relieved and his tone softened. "Second, it's about your crowning ceremony. You should have done it long ago because you were in the period of filial piety, but later on, you were not in the capital except for your obedience. Because you are traveling abroad, the crowning ceremony has not been held. I asked Master Joe to divine the auspicious day. The third day of the 5th lunar month next month will be a good day, and I will give you a crown ceremony then. I have already sent the post to someone else." Luzikin leaned forward and said, "Thank you, Grandpa." The British Duke nodded and continued, "Thirdly, it is a matter of your life. The third wife of the Shi mansion is very happy with you, and the little girl has been waiting for you for many years, so don't let her down. Although the Shi family's threshold is lower than ours, marrying high and marrying low is not a problem. Let your mother-in-law ask a matchmaker to go to Shi mansion to propose marriage and finalize your marriage as soon as possible. This issue." Just as Luzikin opened his mouth, the British Duke interrupted him unhappily, "You just listen when I speak. When I ask you to speak, you can speak again." Luzikin shut up and said no more. The British Duke glared at Luzikin and scolded, "What did I say just now? You interrupted me with just one sentence." Old man Yang reminded with a stern face, "You let him get married." The British Duke nodded, "It's time for a man to get married. You're not young anymore. It's time to calm down. Xiren, Zigzun's children can walk now, so you should hurry up and settle the marriage. As the old saying goes, when you start a family and start a business, you must first start a family and then start a business. You must understand this truth. Luzikin lowered his head and stopped answering, letting the British Duke ramble on. The British Duke took a sip of tea and continued, "Fourth, you must remember that your surname is Lu, not Yet. In the future, you should interfere less with the affairs of the Duke Chinquo and focus more on your family. Years ago, I handed over many properties to Xiren. From now on, please help Xiren more. Zikin, you have always been smart. You should understand that a single tree cannot make a forest. Brothers need to support each other and support each other. The British government is supported by the prince. You should understand that only if the prince is good, we will be good. I'll stop here today. You go back and think about it carefully." Mrs. Yang took over the words, "Tell Mrs. Ye that she is the Crown Prince's wife of the British Duke's Palace, and the British Duke's Palace is her home. When she dies, she will be buried in the ancestral grave of the Lu family, not the Ye family. She will live in her natal family all day long. She is shameless, and she still wants to be ashamed. Okay, the past is in the past, don't mention it again," the British Duke scolded. Mrs. Yang glared at the British father and said angrily, "What do I, a mother, mean to her? She is Ye Yun's eldest daughter. From outsiders' point of view, she is the most knowledgeable about etiquette and propriety. But like her, she lives in her parents' house all day long and doesn't show any filial piety in front of her parents-in-law. There is probably no other one in the whole capital or in the world. She can do it, but I can't even say a word about her." The British Duke waved his hand towards Lu Zikin. "Zikin, if you have something to do, go back first." Lu Zikin bowed to say goodbye, turned around and walked out of Wen Yuan Pavilion. Rugjuan was waiting at the entrance of the courtyard. When he saw Lu Zikin coming out, he leaned forward and said, "Master." Lv Zikin asked, "Are you ready?" Rugjuan responded, "Master, everything is ready. The car is waiting at the east door." Lu Zikin walked towards the east side door and said, "Let's go." In the main hall of Wen Yuan Pavilion, the British father said to Mrs. Yang, "I know clearly that he doesn't take the hard way. Can't you just follow him? If you him off, what good can you gain?" Mrs. Yang choked and said, "I'm just a human being, and I can't speak softly. It's not like you, who do one thing in front of you and another behind your back." The British Duke sighed and ordered Du Bin, "Let me follow him and see where he goes." Du Bin bowed down and turned around to give instructions. Mrs. Yang said in a strange tone, "Where to go? Apart from going to the Chinquo Palace to file a complaint, where else can he go?" The British Duke glanced at Mrs. Yang with disgust. "It's a woman's opinion. I've already said what needs to be said. I still have things to do, so you can go back." Mrs. Yang stood up and said as she walked, "I don't care whether you say it or not. What I want is the result. Either, let Xiren inherit the name of the Ye family and inherit the title of the British Duke in the future. Or, let Dingning become the British Prince. You choose one yourself, otherwise, I will definitely not let you live in peace, nor will the British Duke's government live in peace." The British gentleman drank tea with an expressionless face and did not answer Mrs. Yang's words. When Du Bin came back, he met Mrs. Yang who was going out. She stepped aside and stood with her hands down. "Old lady, walk slowly." Mrs. Yang asked, "Where did that evil boy go?" Du Bin leaned over and said, "Go back to the old lady." Mr. Lu took a car from the east side door and headed towards Chinquo Duke's mansion. "Humph. How about it?" I said, "What else can this scoundrel do besides hurriedly complain? I am waiting for the old lady Qin to enter the palace to seek support from the emperor. I want to see how the emperor can reach out to judge the British government's household affairs." After Mrs. Yang finished speaking, she left with her maid and mother-in-law. The British Duke ordered, "Get the car ready, I have something to go out." Du Ben turned around to give instructions, and then helped the British father change his clothes. Gu Huayu went out and walked more than 10 feet when she found someone following her. Gu Huayu pretended not to know and continued walking forward until she reached Minjiao Pavilion. Lu Guang saw Gu Huayu coming in and greeted him with a smile. Gu Huayu whispered, "Look, who are the two people following behind? Be careful and don't scare the snake." Lu Guang nodded and asked the waiter to welcome Gu Huayu to the second floor. Gu Huayu went up to the second floor, went down the stairs on the right, and then left in a car through the back door. Fugui asked while driving the car, "Miss, where are we going?" Gu Huayu said, "I want to go shopping in the west of the city. You can take me to Qingyuan Street." Fugui responded, "Okay. Miss, sit down." Gu Huayu asked, "How is Chun Tang? Is she okay? Is the vomiting still severe? Is she still taking the pills I gave her?" Chun Tang married Fugui the year before last. She became pregnant not long ago and suffered from severe morning sickness. Gu Huayu gave her some prescriptions to appetize and relieve vomiting. Fu Gaimei said with a smile, "Thank you, Miss Chun Tang stopped vomiting after taking the pills given by the miss. She has a good appetite these days." Gu Huayu talked with Fugui about giving birth to a child. "Miss, we're here." Gu Huayu lifted the curtain, jumped out of the car, looked around, and said, "Is this Qingyuan Street?" Fugui replied, "Yes, a few days ago, Sui-er took the younger ones here for a tour." "Is the younger one waiting here for the young lady?" Gu Huayu shook her head, "No, there are not enough people in the shop. You can go back and work. I will go shopping and go back by myself." Fugui Qingchen responded, "I understand, young lady, please pay attention to your safety." Gu Huayu nodded, "I know, just go back." After Fugui drove away, Gu Huayu walked slowly along Qingyuan Street and walked to the entrance of the British government palace. Gu Huayu stopped and looked around. "Get out of the way, get out of the way." Gu Huayu was driven across the street by the servants of the British government. Gu Huayu looked back at the fierce servant and asked the waiter in the shop, "Don't people stop at the entrance of the British government?" The waiter used chicken feather bullets to shoot ashes and said, "That is the private property of the Duke's mansion. Naturally, no one else is allowed to stay." Gu Huayu frowned, "The street is also the territory of the British government." The waiter glanced at Gu Huayu and pointed at the street with a feather marble, "Half of this street belongs to the British government. It's the right thing to not let people stay." Gu Huayu nodded, "So that's it? Do people passing by have to pay toll?" The waiter looked up at Gu Huayu and said with a smile, "You girl is really interesting in what you say. How could the majestic Duke of Guo be so interested in these two small coins? Besides, the Duke's mansion is not as unkind as you said, and they won't chase you away if you pass by here. If you meet today, you can only say that your luck is not very good. Look, the middle door has been opened. It seems that the Duke is about to go out." Gu Huayu turned around and looked over, and sure enough she saw the middle door of the British Duke's mansion was wide open. Soon, a large carriage drove out. Gu Huayu thought to herself, "No wonder Lu went out for such a big battle, it was definitely the influence of words and deeds." Gu Huayu asked, "This is the trip of the Duke of the country?" The waiter looked at Gu Huayu as if he were an alien. "You're not from the capital, are you? You don't even know the Duke's car." Gu Huayu didn't want to be ridiculed by a waiter, so she smiled at the waiter, turned around and walked forward. Gu Huayu walked along Qingyuan Street until she reached Tianyu First Road, then turned left and walked along Tianyu all the way to Minda Street. Continue to turn left, walk along Minda Street to Tianyu Second Road, and then walk along Tianyu Second Road back to Qingyuan Street. Walking around the British Palace, Gu Huayu looked at her watch and walked for a full 2 hours. Gu Huayu looked back at the British Government Palace. It took 2 hours to walk, and she had to sigh at the size of the courtyard of the British Government Palace. Gu Huayu crossed Qingyuan Street and continued walking along Tianyu Second Road. She wanted to find a restaurant for lunch. Gu Huayu raised her head and looked over. From a distance, she saw a flag flying upstairs with the words Giwan Pavilion written on it. Gu Huayu pursed her lips and had an idea in her mind. She would go to Giwan Pavilion to solve the problem during lunch. Gu Huayu walked to the door of the store, and the waiter greeted her enthusiastically, "Sir, please come with us for dinner." Gu Huayu walked into the store. The waiter asked, "Excuse me, how many guests are there? Do you want a private room or a seat in the lobby?" Gu Huayu stood at the door and looked around, secretly thinking, "I'm here to inquire about the news, who can I ask in the private room?" So he raised his voice and replied, "One person, just sit in the lobby." The waiter bent his waist and replied with a smile, "Okay, sir, please come this way." Gu Huayu glanced at the waiter and saw that he was looking straight towards her. The waiter took Gu Huayu to the seat near the window, wiped the table and chairs with the handkerchief on his shoulder, and said enthusiastically, "Sir, please have a seat." Gu Huayu sat down. Another waiter brought tea and asked with a smile, "What would you like to eat, sir?" Gu Huayu asked, "What are your signature dishes here?" The waiter immediately said, "Salted egg yolk paste crab, glutinous rice chicken, roasted pork chops with thyme honey sauce, squirrel mandarin fish, liuxin for tofu, backbone bean curd yam pot." When Gu Huayu heard this, she raised her hand to stop her and said, "That's all, take one portion of each." The waiter bowed and said, "Okay, sir, please wait a moment." Gu Huayu picked up the cup and sipped the tea, then stretched out her hand to peel the melon seeds. "It's already time to eat." There are not many customers in the store. Half of the tables in the lobby are empty. It seems that this store is not running well. Gu Huayu accidentally glanced at the waiter delivering tea and saw him smiling meaningfully at the waiter soliciting customers. Gu Huayu listened attentively. "This girl is so pretty." The waiter who was soliciting the guests looked back at Gu Huayu and whispered, "Yes, he looks very upright, with thin skin and tender flesh. His skin is white and red, and he smells good. He has a pair of big, watery eyes that can win people's hearts itchy. Well, this is not the most attractive thing. The most attractive thing is the figure. When she followed you in, I took a closer look. This girl is tall, with long legs, a very thin waist, but not too small in front, and she can't be held by one hand. Damn it, the voice is very nice. If it is that, I don't know how many souls it will sell." Gu Huayu narrowed her eyes when she heard this, and her hand holding the cup tightened again and again. At this time, a guest came to the door, and the waiter who solicited the guests walked over to greet the guest. Bringing the guest to a table not far from Gu Huayu, he glanced at Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu pretended not to notice and continued peeling melon seeds. "Well, I just took a closer look and it's really big there. Looking at the way this girl is dressed, she probably hasn't even got haircut yet. You say, you have grown up like this at a young age. How attractive would it be if you had grown out a few years later? I wonder which lucky man has been taken advantage of?" End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 182. Chapter 182 Gaoji. Don't think about it, go to the door to attract customers. After a while, the shopkeeper comes out and sees you being lazy, and he starts to curse again. "Alas, I farewell to you, Uncle Wan Chang Quan Wan from Wan Mansion is here. Hurry up and greet him." "Oh, let's go." Gu Huayu looked at the door and saw a man in a moon-white gown coming into the store holding a folding fan. The waiter who was soliciting customers walked towards the door, bowed and said with a smile, "Please, Mr. Wan." Wan Chang Quan put away the folding fan in his hand, looked at the waiter sideways and asked, "Has Mr. Lu arrived yet?" The waiter smiled apologetically and replied, "Here we are, Here we are. We are already waiting for Uncle Juan in the private room on the second floor. Please come with me, Uncle Juan. As he said that, the waiter led the way forward. When he turned around, the waiter couldn't help but look at Gu Huayu again. Gu Huayu peeled the melon seeds, and caught the waiter's movements in the corner of her clear eyes. The waiter led Wan Changquan upstairs, to the corner of the stairs, and looked at Gu Huayu again. The corner of the stairs is facing Gu Huayu. Wan Changquan's eyes suddenly lit up when he saw Xiangji's beauty. The waiter saw Wan Changquan stop and looked up to see him staring at Gu Huayu intently and smiling knowingly. Sure enough, the man couldn't even move his feet when he saw the beauty. After a while, the waiter shouted, "Uncle Juan, please." Wan Changquan came back to his senses and said, "Okay, please, please." Wan Changquan followed the waiter upstairs, still staring at Gu Huayu. Without looking at the road, Wan Changquan tripped over the stairs and almost fell. The waiter reached out to hold a hand and reminded, "Uncle Juan, be careful." Wan Changquan came to his senses completely and asked, "Whose family does the young lady at that table belong to?" The waiter shook his head and said, "Back to Mr. Juan, I don't know, but this lady looks unfamiliar. I have never seen her before." Wan Changquan nodded. "Oh," he began to make calculations in his mind. The waiter brought Wan Changquan to Yunping Hall. Wan Changquan and Lu Zixun exchanged pleasantries and sat down. After the waiter stepped back, Wan Changquan looked at the door and whispered to Lu Zixun, "Zixun, there is a girl in the lobby downstairs. She has a watery face and is so beautiful." Lu Zixun suddenly became interested when he heard that there was a beautiful woman downstairs. "Really? Downstairs? I didn't see her when I came here." Wan Changquan saw that Lu Zixun was very interested and knew that he was on the right track. Said, "Maybe you entered the store after going upstairs. The window facing the corner of the stairs is so beautiful that you can't even move your legs. Really, if you don't believe me, go and take a look. It's so beautiful that you can't even move your feet, go take a look." With that said, Lu Zixun stood up and walked out. Wan Changquan looked at Lu Zixun's back and reminded, "Be careful, don't let this girl think you are a slut." Lu Zixun replied as he walked, "Don't worry, I know what's going on." Wan Changquan twitched the corners of his mouth, stood up, and walked out slowly. Lu Zixun went downstairs and looked at the table by the window. Xiaoxia was serving food to Gu Huayu, blocking Lu Zixun's view. Lu Zixun held the handrail with both hands and stared at the table by the window, waiting for the waiter to retreat. Here, Gu Huayu waited for the waiter to retreat, then picked up her chopsticks and started eating. Lu Zixun was so surprised when he saw Gu Huayu that he swallowed his saliva. There were only 4 words in his mind: beautiful and delicious. Lu Zixun's actions attracted the attention of people in the lobby, and they all turned to look at Gu Huayu. The shopkeeper returned to the front hall and saw everyone staring at a girl. Then he looked at the girl's appearance and murmured, "My dear, this is an immortal descending to earth." The shopkeeper looked up and saw Lu Zixun on the stairs, and had a bad feeling in his heart. "Damn, with this here, I'm afraid something will happen today." The shopkeeper smiled and greeted Lu Zixun, "The second master is here. Xiangzi, hurry up and wait." The waiter who was serving tea responded, "Yes, second master, your private room is ready. Please come with me." Lu Zixun ignored the waiter, walked to the shopkeeper, waved with his fingers, and asked in a low voice, "Old Zhang, is this girl from nearby? Why haven't I seen her before?" Shopkeeper Zhang leaned towards Lu Zixun and replied in a low voice, "Back to the second master, this girl looks very unfamiliar. I'm afraid she's not from around here." Lu Zixun nodded and said, "I haven't even seen you, so you must not be from around here. There is no maid following you." Shopkeeper Zhang shook his head, "I just went to the kitchen, so I don't know. I'll ask you later." With that said, Shopkeeper Zhang waved to Xiangzi, Come here. Xiangzu responded and walked over. Shopkeeper Zhang asked, is the girl by the window alone or is she followed? Xiangzu leaned forward and said, go back to the shopkeeper. The girl came here alone, and no one followed her. Shopkeeper Zhang waved his hand, I understand, go ahead and get busy. Xiangzu bowed and stepped back. Lu Zixun waved to shopkeeper Zhang, who leaned his head closer. Lu Zixun said, help me find a seat in the lobby, and then help this girl add another dish. Shopkeeper Zhang nodded knowingly, raised his head, looked around, and said, second master, follow the younger one. Shopkeeper Zhang led Lu Zixun to an empty table on the left side of the lobby. Second master, the view here is excellent, you can have a panoramic view of the lobby, are you satisfied, second master? Lu Zixun looked around, nodded and said, well, not bad, this is it. Thank you. Shopkeeper Zhang leaned forward and said, second master, your words are serious. Wan Changquan was at the entrance of the stairs. He had not seen Lu Zixun coming up for a long time. He came downstairs to look for Lu Zixun. When he saw shopkeeper Zhang leading Lu Zixun to the wrong floor, he followed him. What? The second master is not going back to his private room, Wan Changquan asked. Lu Zixun pointed to the seat next to him, motioned for Wan Changquan to sit down, and said, the private room is too stuffy and boring. It's nice here. You can eat and enjoy the scenery at the same time. Wan Changquan sat down with a smile, nodded and said, well, the second master is right. Lu Zixun looked at Gu Huayu and said, she is truly stunning. Wan Changquan looked at Gu Huayu and fanned the flames, the food looks so beautiful, it makes people's hearts itch. What will it taste like if it is eaten in your mouth? Wan Changquan looked at Lu Zixun's expression as he spoke. Sure enough, Lu Zixun's eyes showed greed. Wan Changquan continued, the west of the city is the second master's territory. How come the second master doesn't know there is such a beauty? Lu Zixun stared at Gu Huayu, I've never seen him before. Either he's a new arrival or he's not from this area. Wan Changquan nodded, none of these are important. What is important is that today, the second master has met. What does the second master plan to do? Accept it? Lu Zixun withdrew his gaze, looked at Wan Changquan, and asked meaningfully, what do you think? Wan Changquan smiled and said, it is this girl's blessing to be favored by the second master. Lu Zixun smiled evilly, Uncle Wan is my close friend, he understands me best. Wan Changquan asked with a smile, shall the second master carry it back, or keep it outside? Lu Zixun looked sideways at Wan Changquan and said, since I have taken a liking to him, I naturally want to take him back. Wan Changquan smiled apologetically, yes, that's right. Naturally, such a beauty should be kept in the house to make people feel at ease. Lu Zixun was in a good mood. He turned his eyes to Gu Huayu again and said, that's right. What you said about the horses, I think it can be done. Let's discuss it later. Of course, if you can help me fulfill my current wish, the horse matter is just a matter of words. I promise that as long as I am here, I will eat all the horses you have. Wan Changquan cupped his hands and said, second master is very happy. With second master's words, Wan will try his best to fulfill second master's wishes. Lu Zixun poked Wan Changquan's shoulder with a folding fan and said with a smile, Uncle Wan is a smart man, and I like to deal with smart people. One thing, let me make it clear first. If the horse is good, you cannot use a bad horse to trick me. Wan Changquan responded with an apologetic smile, second master, don't worry about this. Wan guarantees that these horses are definitely of the best quality, and all of them are fat and strong. In terms of price, if the second master can give a high quality price, then after the project is completed, Wan Mao can pay the second master this amount for each horse. How about that? Stop it, don't tempt me with money. I have never been short of money since I was a child. Wan Changquan was afraid of offending Lu Zixun, so he quickly explained, Wan knows that the second master is never short of money. However, who doesn't mind having too much money? The second master keeps the free money and can spend it on his beauties. Women like to wear beautiful clothes and beautiful accessories. If a beauty like this is dressed up, she will have another look. Right? LV Zixun nodded, what you said makes sense. Seeing that Lu Ziqian had listened, Wan Changquan continued, if a beauty takes money from the second master, she will be more interested in the second master. Lu Zixun looked at Gu Huayu, as if he saw her in gorgeous clothes thanking him and being obedient to him. He nodded with a smile and said, Changquan is right. Tepa Temple needs a batch of horses recently. Later, you can pick up a dozen and send them over for everyone to see. Wan Changquan responded repeatedly, okay, Wan will make arrangements later. Don't worry, the second master. I guarantee that the quality and quantity will be maintained, and we will never embarrass the second master. Lu Zixun pursed his lips toward Gu Huayu and whispered, tell me, how can I get this? Wan Changquan looked at Gu Huayu and whispered, when this girl goes out to eat, she doesn't choose a private room, but chooses the lobby. Either you don't have enough money, or you don't know how to get by. In fact, in the final analysis, it is all due to lack of money. What is the identity of the second master? If she knew the identity of the second master, she would definitely try her best to climb onto the high branch of the second master. Lu Zixun's eyebrows were raised when he heard this, and he nodded repeatedly, Changquan, your analysis is reasonable. But how can I let her know my identity? I can't just run over and tell her that I am the second master of the British government. Wan Changquan glanced at Gu Huayu and lowered his voice, of course it can't be like this. Look at the way this girl eats, she is very well educated and her movements are elegant. LV Zixun nodded and said, well, what does this mean? Wan Changquan went on to say, such a person has a high spirit and a strong temper. He cannot be forceful and has to use detours. Master, you have to make her fall in love with you, let her be fascinated by your majestic grace. Lu Zixun suddenly thought of something and said, well, Changquan, you are right. I asked shopkeeper Zhang to add another dish to the girl. Shopkeeper Zhang is very polite and will naturally introduce me to the girl. I just waited patiently, waiting for the girl to take the initiative to thank me. Gu Huayu ate leisurely, listening to the two of them talking while eating. When she heard this, she almost vomited. These two people refreshed her view of people. Gu Huayu raised her head and glanced at Lu Zixun and Wan Changquan. She didn't understand how Wan Changquan could see Lu Zixun's majestic appearance from his fat body. Lu Zixun saw Gu Huayu looking over and said excitedly, Changquan, she just looked at me. Do you think she noticed me? I seemed to see her smiling at me, Lu Zixun continued. Wan Changquan nodded cooperatively and said, yes, Wan also saw her smiling at the second master. Shopkeeper Zhang walked to Gu Huayu's table carrying the dishes, leaned over and said, Mr. Lu asked me to give this to the girl. Gu Huayu raised her head to look at the jiaoliu meatballs on the tray and asked, who is Mr. Lu? I don't know him. Shopkeeper Zhang pointed sideways at Lu Zixun, who was high up on the left, and said with a bit of flattery, the man sitting over there, wearing indigo brocade clothes, is Mr. Lu from the British government. Gu Huayu looked at Lu Zixun, and Lu Zixun quickly waved to Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu looked away, pointed at the dishes on the table and said to shopkeeper Zhang, I'm sorry, I'm full. Shopkeeper Zhang advised, this is Mr. Lu's wish. Miss, at least try it. Gu Huayu said in embarrassment, but I really can't eat any more. As she spoke, Gu Huayu turned around and looked around, and saw a beggar across the street leaning against a tree and not knowing what to think. Gu Huayu stood up, took a gold nugget from her purse, put it on the table, and said, this is the money for today's meal. No need to change it? I think he is quite hungry. I will thank the beggar for the meatball, Mr. Liu. Speaking, Gu Huayu took the meatballs from shopkeeper Zhang's hand. Shopkeeper Zhang looked at the gold coins on the table in a daze. This was the first time he met someone who paid gold for meals. Similarly petrified are Lu Zixun and Wan Changquan on the high left. Lu Zixun watched Gu Huayu take the dishes from shopkeeper Zhang, and was extremely excited waiting for Gu Huayu to come to him to thank him. Unexpectedly, Gu Huayu brought the dishes out of Giun Pavilion and gave the plate of dishes to the beggar across the street. The beggar stood up in shock. After listening to Gu Huayu's words, he turned to look at the store and bowed to Lu Zixun to thank him. Lu Zixun's face changed wonderfully. He was so angry that his flesh trembled slightly. He pointed at the door and asked, "Changquan, what does she mean?" Wan Changquan came back to his senses during Lu Zixun's question, and his mind started spinning rapidly. "Second master, don't calm down," the beggar bows to second master to thank him. Lu Zixun cursed, "Damn it, I want a beggar to thank you with a hammer." In order to get the opportunity to donate horses to Tapu's temple, Wan Changquan tried his best to get close to Lu Zixun. It was hard to make Lu Zixun happy today. Just after he was relieved, Lu Zixun was annoyed again before the matter was settled. Seeing that the cooked duck was about to fly, Wan Changquan was going crazy with anxiety. With a smile on his face, he comforted him and said, "Second master, don't be impatient. You need to listen to what Wan has to say first." "You mean, what are you doing grinding like a girl?" Lu Zixun opened his mouth and complained. This is the first time in his life that Wan Changquan was called a bitch, and the anger in his heart surged up. End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 183. Chapter 183. Things are different and people are different. Wan Changquan thought about business, and then about his gambling debts. He took a deep breath and tried to suppress his anger. He said with a smile on his face, "Second master, you are a royal nobleman. From childhood to adulthood, you have eaten, learned, and been top-notch in everything. Right?" Lu Zixun felt much relieved after hearing the good words, but his face was still angry, and he stared at Wan Changquan with sideways eyes without saying a word. Wan Changquan was uneasy being stared at by Lu Zixun. Thinking about his gambling debt, he lowered his head and continued to flatter. Furthermore, the second master is tall and mighty, and his whole body exudes masculinity. What woman wouldn't like him? Wan Changquan smoothed his hair and finally made Lu Zixun's expression calm down. Lu Zixun raised his chin and replied arrogantly, "This is natural." Seeing Lu Zixun's expression soften, Wan Changquan breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, and then said, "Ever since he was a child, everything he has received has been the best. Yes, vision and knowledge are naturally the best. Let's just say that the second master took a liking to the girl just now, which shows that this girl is not a common thing. The girl gave the dish given by the second master to the beggar, which shows that the girl is compassionate and kind. Such a woman is worthy of the noble second master, isn't she?" After hearing Wan Changquan's words, Lu Zixun's anger dissipated and he said with a smile, "You are right, there are so many good-looking skins. Only those with skins and character are talented and beautiful, and they are worthy of being a British princess. Come on, let's sit down and talk." Wan Changquan sat down with a smile. Shopkeeper John came here nervously, feeling very frightened. He worked as the shopkeeper of Giun Pavilion in the west of the city for 7 years, and he could be regarded as watching Lu Zixun grow up. Master Lu has a bad temper, which is well known in this area of Zikan. The commander-in-chief and Mr. Liu have been on good terms since they were young, and the two families are extremely close relatives. If the commander knew what happened today, he would be severely punished. Second master, that girl. Shopkeeper Zhang lowered his head and said hesitantly. It's okay, I've seen it all. This girl has a bit of a fierce temper, but she has a good character. I like her. Lu Zixun waved his hand and said gently. Shopkeeper Zhang looked at Lu Zixun in disbelief, and saw the other person looking at him with a smile. He quickly lowered his head and replied, yes, it is indeed good. Lu Zixun asked, have you told her who I am? Shopkeeper Zhang leaned forward and said, back to the second master, I told this girl that the second master is the second master of the British government. Shopkeeper Zhang hesitated to remind Lu Zixun, based on his intuition, this girl was not simple. Lu Zixun nodded with satisfaction, well, that's good. That's enough. Lu Zixun turned to Wan Changquan and asked, Changquan, tell me, is this little playing hard to get with me? Wan Changquan nodded thoughtfully, it's very possible. There are so many good-looking girls in the world. How many people want to enter the British government? If this girl is like other girls, she comes as soon as you wave the second master's hand, then she is too cheap, and others will not cherish something that is too easy to get. Yes, that must be the case, Changquan, you are absolutely right. Lu Zixun pinched his chin to interrupt Wan Changquan. Then he murmured to himself, little girl, this is interesting. After finishing speaking, Lu Zixun looked at Shopkeeper Zhang and asked, do you know her last name and where she is from? Shopkeeper Zhang shook his head and whispered, it's useless for me, I never asked. He didn't ask, the girl didn't even give him a chance to ask. Lu Zixun accepted Wan Changquan's words and preconceived the conclusion in his mind that Gu Huayu was playing hard to get. After hearing what Shopkeeper Zhang said, he didn't blame him for being useless. He folded his hands and thought for a while, then said, Humph, let's play a little trick of hide and seek with me. As long as she is in the capital, I don't believe her, and I can't find her yet. The person I want will be found even if I dig 3 feet into the ground. Chang Sheng, lead someone to chase her over and take a look. I'm keeping an eye on her. Where does she live? Then come back and report. Lv Zixun turned around and ordered Chang Sheng. Chang Shenkishan responded, I understand, little one. Wan Changquan echoed, that is, as long as people are in the capital, where can they find reason? Lu Zixun nodded, raised his head and said to Shopkeeper Zhang, tell your people and stay alert in the future. As soon as that girl comes to your store, go and tell me as soon as possible. Shopkeeper Zhang nodded repeatedly, yes, I understand. Are you two dining here or in a private room? Lu Zixun said, the view here is wide. I am right here. From now on, I will sit in this seat. Shopkeeper Zhang bowed and said, okay. I'll have someone serve the dishes to you too. Gu Huayu came out of Giun Pavilion and saw a ready-made clothes shop in front of her. She went in and bought some clothes and put on makeup in the changing room. Gu Huayu came out of the tailor shop and saw Lu Zixun's young man chasing people, so he stood and watched the excitement. Chang Sheng saw Gu Huayu and asked, have you seen a girl in pink? About the same height as you? Gu Huayu nodded repeatedly and said, yes, I'm going over there. Chase, Chang Sheng led the people to chase in the direction pointed by Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu looked back at Giun Pavilion with an indescribable feeling in her heart. She didn't know what Giun Pavilion was like 10 years ago, but with people like Uncle Hua and Susine here, it would definitely not be what it is today. Thinking of this, Gu Huayu couldn't help but sigh to herself, after 10 years, things have finally changed. When Gu Huayu was in the west of the city, she rented a car from a car rental agency and went back. Back at Wuitong Garden, Gu Huayu asked, is Uncle Hua back? The porter leaned forward and said, Miss Hua, Manager Hua came back a quarter of an hour ago. After hearing this, Gu Huayu went straight to the front yard. Huada, Sui-er, Wang Gu, Lu Guang, Ruan Wu, Mi Chen, and Han Shi were all enjoying the shade under the corridor. When they saw Gu Huayu coming back, they all stood up to greet her. Gu Huayu walked over and sat down, and said with a smile, "No need to be formal, everyone can sit down." Wang Qin poured a cup of tea and handed it to Gu Huayu's hand, and asked, "Where did the lady go shopping today? I heard from the concierge that the lady went out early in the morning." Gu Huayu took a sip of tea, held the cup and replied, "I went to the west of the city and spent a day shopping there." Sui-er joked, "Miss, are you going to meet Mr. Lu by chance?" Gu Huayu glared at Sui-er, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Sui-er said with a smile, "Sixth Master sent the young lady back last night, and I can see it clearly." Sixth Master. Sui-er, shut up, Gu Huayu raised her voice to stop him. "What's going on? The lady came back last night and was brought back by Master Lu." Sui-er, please tell me clearly, what did you see? What happened to Master Lu? Wang Qin asked gossiping. Sui-er looked at Gu Huayu and didn't dare to talk nonsense. Gu Huayu looked at Sui-er and warned, "If you dare to talk nonsense, you will go back to Hangzhou to seize Wangzi tomorrow, and Qing'an will come to the capital in exchange." Sui-er decisively shut up. Wang Qin looked at Gu Huayu and said, "Miss, do you know what this is called?" Gu Huayu asked, "What is it called?" "If you want to cover up the situation, the more you don't let Sui-er say anything, the more we will think about it. We are several hundred years old in total, what have we never seen? Therefore, you'd better give us the bottom line." "You think so?" Wang Qin said, and also pulled Huada and Lu Guang in. Huada nodded, "Yes, I think what shopkeeper Wang said is reasonable." Lu Guang also nodded. Wang Qin sat next to Gu Huayu, tilted her head and asked, "Miss, what is going on between you and Mr. Lulu?" Gu Huayu raised her hand to straighten Wang Qin's face, and said with a smile, "Nothing happened, don't think about it." "Who were those two people this morning?" At the last sentence, Gu Huayu looked at Lu Guang. Lu Guang leaned forward and said, "Miss Hui, those two people are from the Long Shadow Guard." "People from the Long Shadow Guard," several people asked in unison. Lu Guang nodded, and seeing the alert looks on several people's faces, he continued to explain, listening to what they said, it seemed like they were ordered by the superiors to inquire about the young lady's situation. Their words were extremely obscene. Gu Huayu nodded, "Oh, I understand." Huada asked, "Miss, do you know who he is?" Gu Huayu nodded, "Well, it should be Huaru Iming. During the party at Fanlu yesterday, he looked at me wrong." Wang Qin took over the words, "That's right, Huaru Iming is lustful, and the young lady's appearance will bring disaster to the country and the people." "Wang Gu, what are you talking about?" Gu Huayu stared at Wang Qin. Wang Qin smiled and corrected her, "I'm sorry, I used the wrong word. The young lady is so beautiful that Huaru Iming will be so fascinated when she sees her that she will be obsessed with her." Gu Huayu took a sip of tea and continued, "Really, there are just as many subordinates as there are leaders. The current Long Shadow Guards are just a bunch of rabble." Gu Huayu briefly told everyone what she saw in Giun Pavilion. After hearing this, Huada cursed with regret, the good Long Shadow Guard was destroyed in the hands of these bastards. Gu Huayu looked dazzled and advised, "It's over, Uncle Hua, don't be angry. How is the matter at the bank?" Huada bowed and said, "Other things are almost done. I will go to the yamen tomorrow, prepare the records at the yamen, pay the due fees, and then decorate the shop, and then it can be opened." Gu Huayu said, "Thank you for your hard work, Uncle Hua. I will try to open in early June." "Early June, isn't it too late?" The rouge shop also opened in those days, Sui-er asked. Gu Huayu looked at Huada. Uncle Hua, what do you think? Huada replied, there is no conflict. We divide the work and each perform his duties. If you don't have enough people, go to Yahang to buy some, bring them back to the bank, and hand them over to me and Hanshi. Sui'er and Ruanwu will handle the rouge shop, while Lu Guang will be in charge of Minjiao Pavilion. Starting tomorrow, Wang Qin and Mi Chen will go to Giun Pavilion in various places in the capital, trying to buy 2 shops near Giun Pavilion and open a wine shop as soon as possible. Gu Huayu nodded and said, okay, listen to Uncle Hua's arrangements. We will stop here today and rest early. By the way, we will withdraw King Zhu and the others. Uncle Hua bowed and said, okay, I'll write a letter when I get back and ask King Zhu and the others to come back. When Gu Huayu returned to her small courtyard, Ling Dong made tea for her and asked, Miss, have you eaten? Do you want my slave to get you some food? Gu Huayu thought for a while and said, bring me some fruit and vegetable salad. Lonicera bowed her knees and turned around to prepare. In the past 2 years, Gu Huayu has taught Lonicera many strange things. For example, how to boil milk, then make kefir from the boiled milk, and then mix the kefir with fruits and vegetables and eat it raw. How to cut the beef into thick slices, marinate it with sauce, and then fry it before eating it. It should not be fried until it is cooked. It should be paired with Gu Huayu's homemade wine and so on. Gu Huayu was leaning on the soft couch, thinking about how to arrange tomorrow. April 29th, Luzikin's birthday. What gift should she give him that is both meaningful and practical? Lonicera came in with a salad. Miss, here it is. Gu Huayu reached out to take the salad and said to Lonicera, go and have a rest. I'll clean it up later. Landong stood there, lowering his head and rubbing his hands. Gu Huayu stuffed an apple into her mouth, raised her head and asked, what? Is something wrong? Landong said sheepishly, Miss, do you still have the anti-scarf you gave the slave last time? Gu Huayu pointed to the cabinet beside the bed. Yes, it's in the cabinet. You can get it yourself. Bring more. Lonicera bowed her knees, opened the cabinet, took out 2 packages and left. After finishing the salad, Gu Huayu stood up, washed the bowl, sat back on the soft couch and continued to think about the gift. Gu Huayu heard footsteps coming this way and immediately sat up straight. As the footsteps came closer, Gu Huayu pursed her lips upwards, stood up and went to the yard, saying to Qing Yu, no need to guard, go and have a rest. King Yu jumped down from the tree, bowed and said, okay, good night, miss. After Qing Yu retreated, Gu Huayu leaned against the pillars of the corridor, waiting for people outside the wall to approach. Are you sure it's this small courtyard? Hui, yeah, I've made inquiries and found out that Dr. Gu lives in this small courtyard, Rugjuan's voice said. How to get in? I'll step on you, Luzikin asked. Gu Huayu wanted to laugh when she heard this. She never thought that the upright Mr. Lulu would climb over the wall in the middle of the night. If word of this spread, how many people would be shocked? Gu Huayu raised her head and looked at the high wall, wondering if she should pass a ladder over. Well, sir, go up from this way. There is a tree in the courtyard. After you climb up the wall, you can climb to the tree, and then go down from the tree to the courtyard, Rugjuan said. Luzikin sighed, do you think it's too late for me to start practicing Qinggong now? Rugjuan whispered, I think it is more effective for me to practice climbing trees. You deserve a beating. Rugjuan stepped aside and said, I don't want anyone to tell the truth anymore. You're talking so much, hurry up and push me up. Rugjuan responded, yes, you stepped on my knees first, and then stepped on my shoulders. Is this okay? Will it hurt? Luzikin asked. Rugjuan replied, don't worry, I will step on it, the little one can bear it. I stepped on it. Gu Huayu listened to the conversation between the two, looked at the autumn tree beside the courtyard wall, sighed, went into the space and took out a ladder. Luzikin climbed up the wall and was about to climb up the tree when he heard a voice coming from below. "Stop climbing the tree and come down the ladder." "Master, have you been discovered?" Rugjuan asked nervously. Luzikin was startled at first. After hearing Gu Huayu's voice, he said to Rugjuan, "It's okay, it's Xiao. You can wait for me in the car." End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 184. Chapter 184 Looking for Trouble. Luzikin came down from the ladder and smiled silly at Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu couldn't help but laugh when she saw his embarrassed look. Said, "Okay, why don't you go through the front door?" Luzikin reached out and Gu Huayu naturally put her hand in his. When Luzikin held Gu Huayu's hand, the two of them were stunned. They had just met yesterday, but they had a tacit understanding like lovers who had been lovers for many years. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Luzikin took Gu Huayu's hand and walked up the corridor, and said softly, "I'm coming to see you late at night. How can I go through the gate? Can I still see you through the gate?" Gu Huayu raised her head to look at Luzikin and asked, "Why are you coming here so late at night?" Luzikin met Gu Huayu's gaze and said bluntly, "I missed you, so I came to see you." Seeing Luzikin's tired face, Gu Huayu asked, "What's wrong? You're very tired." Luzikin didn't want to hide anything from Gu Huayu, so he nodded honestly, "Yeah, a little bit. But now that I see you, I'm not tired anymore." Gu Huayu smiled at Luzikin and asked, "Sit in the courtyard or go inside?" Luzikin looked around and asked, "Is it convenient?" Gu Huayu smiled and said, "You've climbed over the wall to get in, why are you asking if it's convenient?" Luzikin touched his nose uncomfortably and said, "I was only thinking about you and nothing else." Gu Huayu pursed her lips and said, "It's okay. I'll let Qingyu and Ling Dong take a rest. Then I'll go into the house and take a rest," Luzikin said. Gu Huayu let Luzikin into the room and pointed to the soft couch, "Sit down." Luzikin walked to the soft couch and sat down, stretched out his hand to pull Gu Huayu to his side, and begged, "Xiao, sit with me for a while." Gu Huayu followed her words and sat down next to Luzikin. Luzikin leaned on the back of the soft couch, gently squeezing Gu Huayu's hand, and closed his eyes to rest. Gu Huayu accompanied him quietly, and when she saw his brows furrowed, she took her hand out of his. Luzikin immediately opened his eyes. "What's wrong?" Gu Huayu said, "You close your eyes and rest for a while, and I'll massage your head." Luzikin twitched the corners of his mouth, smiled reassuringly, and said, "Thank you." The soft couch was against the wall. Gu Huayu couldn't stand behind her, so she had to massage Luzikin sideways. Luzikin raised his arms and put his arms around Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu stopped what she was doing and looked down at Luzikin. Luzikin closed his eyes and said, "Xiao, I'm tired, let me hold you for a while." Gu Huayu continued to massage him and let him hold her. I don't know if Gu Huaying's hand has spells, or she is around. Luzikin feels that the suffocation in her heart slowly dissipates, and a warm tenderness around himself makes him feel at ease. Luzikin opened his eyes, raised his hand and held Gu Huayu's hand in his. "Thank you, I'm much better." Gu Huayu sat upright and took Luzikin's pulse. After a moment, she asked, "Why is the anger so strong?" Luzikin sighed and said, "I'm angry." Gu Huayu turned her head and looked at Luzikin. "What? Old Mrs. Yang is having trouble again?" Luzikin nodded and told what happened in the morning. After hearing this, Gu Huayu asked, "Who is the head of the British government in normal times? Who has the final say?" Luzikin was stunned for a moment, suddenly thought of something, and frowned slightly. "Yes, grandfather usually has the final say. Today, what grandfather said seems to be in accordance with grandmother's wishes." Gu Huayu said, There are two possibilities: either, the head of the British government is old Mrs. Yang. Or, the British government has the handle of old Mrs. Yang. Lu Ziqin looked at Gu Huayu with admiration. She was not only smart, but also very thoughtful. Lu Ziqin thought for a while and said, I think the latter is more likely. But what leverage does my grandfather have in her hands? Gu Huayu took Lu Ziqin's finger and said, the British public is a well-known figure in Jingcheng, and others have always relied on him to make a living. It is no small matter that can make the British public jealous. But generally speaking, the things that Mrs. Yang knew were the people or things that the British father cared about. This is the saying goes, if you attack something, you will save it. However, there is no rush. We are like foxes, and they will show their tails at some point. Let us wait slowly, remain unchanged in response to all changes, and use our tactics when the time comes. Lu Ziqin tilted his head, leaned against Gu Huayu's head, and said softly, Xiao, why are you so smart? Gu Huayu leaned her head over, touched Lu Ziqin's head, and said half-jokingly, do you feel like you have found a treasure? Lu Ziqin turned his head and kissed Gu Huayu on the face. Yes, I found a treasure. Gu Huayu didn't expect that Lu Ziqin would kiss her. She turned to stone instantly and looked at Lu Ziqin stupidly. Lu Ziqin raised his hand to hold Gu Huayu's face and asked, what's wrong? Are you stupid? Gu Huayu nodded mechanically. Lu Ziqin was so cute by Gu Huayu that his heart was as soft as a puddle of water. He held Gu Huayu's face and lowered his head to kiss her. Gu Huayu looked at Lu Ziqin with wide eyes, but Lu Ziqin covered her with his hands. Closing her eyes, Gu Huayu felt and responded with her heart. It wasn't until Gu Huayu felt like she was suffocating that Lu Ziqin let go of his hand. Gu Huayu opened her big watery eyes and looked at Lu Ziqin, who was breathing heavily, with hot eyes and slightly swollen lips. She couldn't help but put her arms around his neck. I don't know how long it took before the two separated. Lu Ziqin picked up the cup on the table, raised his head and drank the tea in the cup. Xiao, I'm going back. Gu Huayu nodded, will you accompany me for a walk in the countryside tomorrow? Outskirts? What's going on? Lu Ziqin asked. Gu Huayu nodded, well, I will come to Qingzhou to find you in the future, and then set off and come back in front of the city gate. Lu Ziqin nodded and said, okay. I'll be waiting for you at Qingkeju in the future. Gu Huayu stood up to see Lu Ziqin off and said, tomorrow, I'll let them open a door here to save you the trouble of climbing up and down. Lu Ziqin hugged Gu Huayu into his arms and whispered, I want to marry you back as soon as possible. Gu Huayu put her arm around Lu Ziqin's waist and said, wait a little longer until I avenge my parents. Lu Ziqin lowered his head, kissed Gu Huayu's forehead, and said after a moment, okay, I'll wait for you. After seeing Lu Ziqin off, Gu Huayu returned to the room and leaned on the soft couch, her mind filled with images of kissing Lu Ziqin. Gu Huayu blushed and her heart skipped a beat thinking about it. She raised her hand to cover her mouth, feeling a cool feeling on her lips. Gu Huayu lowered her head to look at her hands and saw Qingfeng taking form. Gu Huayu suddenly thought of something and looked at Qingfeng in shock, are you really a spirit? You were here just now, right? The green wind does not move. Gu Huayu said, understand my words and become invisible. The green wind disappeared immediately. Gu Huayu ran around the room frantically and yelled, you bad guy, don't you know how to ignore me? Qingfeng appeared. Gu Huayu stretched out her hand to pinch Qingfeng and threatened, bad guy, don't peep next time, understand? Otherwise, I will throw you into the toilet. If you understand and can do it, you will become invisible immediately. Qingfeng became invisible again. Gu Huayu smiled and said, come out. Qingfeng appeared and slowly retreated from the base of Gu Huayu's index finger. Gu Huayu asked, want to come down? Gu Huayu picked off Qingfeng, put it in the palm of her hand, and asked, you are a little excited today, Why? Green wind swirled in Gu Huayu's hand. Seeing its cheerful look, Gu Huayu asked, "Do you like him? You like Lu Zikin?" Qing Feng then turned twice. Gu Huayu said, "Don't try to figure him out, he is mine." Qing Feng lay down on the palm of his hand and ignored Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu did not give in, and said sternly, "Remember him, he is mine, you can't covet him. Understand and do it, and become invisible." Qing Feng disappeared. Gu Huayu frowned and said, "Since you know he is mine and you don't covet him, why are you happy? Are you happy for me? If so, show up." Qing Feng did not show up. Gu Huayu was puzzled, thought for a while, and said, "Are you happy to see him? If so, show up." Qing Feng appeared immediately. Gu Huayu gritted her teeth and said, "You still say you don't covet him? Huh." The green wind swayed from side to side in Gu Huayu's hand. "No? What is that? Do you know him? Is he someone you are familiar with?" Qing Feng shook back and forth, as if nodding. Gu Huayu frowned and asked, "Is he your master?" The green wind swayed from side to side again. Gu Huayu pursed her lips and said domineeringly, "It's okay if you don't. Just remember, I am your master. If you dare to betray the master, I will throw you into the manure pit." Qing Feng lay down again to protest. Gu Huayu looked at Qing Feng and smiled and said, "If you don't want to stay in the cesspit, just be good. Tomorrow is his birthday, and I have to choose a gift for him. Alas, what gift should I give him?" When Gu Huayu raised her hand to look at her watch, she suddenly thought of another watch in the space. She felt happy and said, "I know what to give." The watch in the space is a pair with the one in her hand. Luo Heiran's family makes precision instruments. Knowing that she returned from modern times to ancient times, they gave her a pair of couple watches. Gu Huayu put Qing Feng back on her index finger and turned around to enter the space. There were so many objects in the space that Gu Huayu couldn't remember where she put her watch, so she searched for them one by one. Finally, found in the drawer in the upper right corner. Gu Huayu took out her watch, chose another bottle of perfume, and wrapped it in two exquisite brocade bags. Gu Huayu came out of the space and fell asleep. On the other side, Lu Zikin returned to the car and Rugjuan asked, "Master, where are you going?" Lu Zikin thought for a while and said, "Go to Qingkeju." Rugjuan drove towards Qingkeju. On the way, he couldn't help but ask, "Sir, was Dr. Gu in the yard just now?" Lu Zikin nodded and replied, "Yes." After saying that, Lu Zikin fell into deep thought. It was so wonderful to be with Xiao. Just after they separated, he started to miss her again. "I really don't want to be separated from her for a moment, I really want to be with her all the time." Lu Zikin thought and secretly thought that he had to find out the truth as soon as possible and avenge Uncle Hua and the others before he could marry Xiao back. The next day, Gu Huayu told Lonisara to go to Zhuangzi to arrange the arrangements early in the morning. At the beginning of the day, Gu Huayu asked Qing Yu to drive to Qingkeju to pick up Lu Zikin. Lu Zikin has been looking forward to the end of the day since he got up in the morning. He looked at the hourglass countless times in the morning and was not in the mood to eat lunch. He finally realized what it meant to live like a year. Seeing that he was restless, Rugjuan asked, "Sir, are you feeling unwell? Do you want Ruhi to come and have a look?" Lu Zikin looked at the hourglass and waved his hands, "It's okay. Just wait at the door. If Xiao comes, come and report it." Rugjuan understood the idea and hurriedly leaned over and said, "Yes, little one, go right now." After saying that, Rugjuan Ma slipped out of the room. By the end of the day, Rugjuan had not come up to report, so Lu Zikin couldn't sit still, so he came to the back door and guarded the door like a watchman's stone. Before Zheng, Gu Huayu went to the back door of Qing guest house. Lu Zikin rushed over in one stride, turned around and said to Rugjuan, "No need to follow. Rugjuan watched his master get into the car and asked hurriedly, "Master, where are you going?" Gu Huayu lifted the curtain and said to Rugjuan, "Don't worry, we will go to the countryside and come back later." King Yu waited for Lu Zikan to sit down and drove away. On the way, Lu Zikan asked, "Xiao, where are we going?" Gu Huayu said, "I will take you to Zhuangzi to have a look and have dinner with my father and mother." Lu Zikan suddenly said nervously, "Why didn't you tell me earlier? I didn't prepare anything. It was very rude to visit the elders empty-handed." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "Don't worry, I've prepared a gift for you. It's in the secret compartment of the carriage." Lu Zikan raised his arms and hugged Gu Huayu and said, "Thank you." Gu Huayu leaned into Lu Zikan's arms and smiled and winked at Lu Zikan. Lu Zikan looked down at Gu Huayu, his eyes full of tenderness. The two of them just stared at each other, neither of them speaking. Finally, Gu Huayu couldn't resist Lu Zikan's doting eyes. She blushed and looked away, turning to play with Lu Zikan's fingers. The two chatted casually about home affairs. "Miss, that person seems to be Shi Niang." Qing Yu's words sounded outside the car. Gu Huayu sat up straight, opened the curtains, looked over, and asked, "Where is it?" Qing Yu pointed with his riding crop and said, "In front of the Tu temple on the right front." Gu Huayu looked over and saw Shi Niang kneeling in front of the Tu temple, kowtowing to the Tu temple. Qing Yu asked, "Miss, do you want to say hello to Shi Niang?" Gu Huayu looked at Shi Niang's back and said, "No, just pretend you don't know about this and don't mention it when you get back." Qing Yu nodded in agreement. Lu Zikan leaned his head over, glanced at the figure in front of the Earth Temple, and asked, "Who is Shi Niang?" Gu Huayu put down the curtains, sat up straight, and said, "I don't know who she is. The first time I met her was 4 years ago in the eastern suburbs of Shishan. At that time, she was beaten by a group of gangsters because she stole their shoes. I helped her out. The second time I saw her was half a year later. She was thrown out of a restaurant in Shishan by 2 waiters. Later on, she followed me from Shishan to Hongcheng, then from Hongcheng to Hangcheng, and from Hangcheng to Beijing." After hearing this, Lu Zikan asked, "Have you not checked her past?" Gu Huayu shook her head, "No, I didn't detect any malice from her, so I didn't check her past. Since she is a friend, you should trust her. If she feels that I am worthy of her trust and it is necessary to tell me about her past, she will naturally tell me. If she doesn't want to say it, I will give her space. This is a sign of respect for her." L. Zikan asked, "Aren't you curious?" Gu Huayu smiled and said, "There is nothing to be curious about. The more you know, the more troubles you will have. I don't want to ask for trouble." End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 185. Chapter 185, Not to be Taken Lightly. Lu Zikan rubbed Gu Huayu's head and said dotingly, "How can you live so transparently at such a young age?" Gu Huayu smiled but said nothing. Lu Zikan suddenly remembered Gu Jingliang's apprenticeship. "I went to the residence of the great scholar Yang and personally gave Brother Liang's articles to the great scholar Yang." Gu Huayu sat up straight and asked in surprise, "Master Yang? Bachelor Yang who has been the husband of several princes?" Then Lu Zikan nodded, "Yes, that's him. When my grandfather was still alive, he had a close personal relationship with Master Yang. Scholar Yang was a disciple of my grandmother's father, Bachelor Huang Xia Huang. Therefore, I grew up with Master Yang. A lot of guidance, he is also my master." Gu Huayu nodded and asked, "Are your grandmother's parents still alive? Are they also in the capital?" Lu Zikan shook his head and said lonely, "My grandmother's ancestral home is Mingzhou. My grandmother died when my father was born, and my great-grandmother fell ill, so my great-grandfather took my great-grandmother back to Mingzhou. Last year I went to Mingzhou. My great-grandfather and great-grandmother passed away. I went to pay homage to them at their graves. Your grandmother doesn't have any other brothers or sisters, Gu Huayu asked. Elvizakin shook his head, no, they only have one daughter, the grandmother. Gu Huayu knew in her heart that this was not only heartbreaking for a white-haired person to send a black-haired person away, but the pain of losing an only child would linger for a lifetime, making people suffer from endless longing. Gu Huayu said apologetically, I'm sorry. Luzikin shook his head, fool, it's not your fault. Why do you apologize? Gu Huayu asked, is there anyone else in the Huang family? Luzikin nodded, yes, my grandmother has a cousin, and both of them are living well now. After my great-grandfather and others returned to Mingzhou, they were the ones taking care of the two old people. Remember their kindness and help them as much as you can in the future, Gu Huayu said softly. Luzikin shook Gu Huayu's hand, nodded and said, I think so too. Gu Huayu brought the topic back, Grandmaster Yang is a great figure. My brother. Luzikin understood Gu Huayu's worries, patted Gu Huayu's hand gently and said, don't underestimate Brother Liang, I have read his articles. Although his writing skills are more immature, at his age, he can write. It is not easy to publish such an article. It can be seen that Brother Liang is a hard-working person. Academician Yang likes hard-working students the most. This morning, the boy next to Grand Scholar Yang sent me a message, asking me to take Brother Liang to the Yang mansion another day. Gu Huayu's eyes shone with joy, so, my brother is expected to become a disciple of Grand Scholar Yang. Luzikin smiled and nodded, well, if nothing else happens, it should be fine. Gu Huayu excitedly held Luzikin's face and kissed him on the cheek. Thank you, Qinjian. Luzikin was stunned at first, and then, before Gu Huayu retreated, he raised his hand and grabbed Gu Huayu's head, lowered his head. It took a long time to let go of Gu Huayu. Luzikin said hoarsely, thanks like this will make you appear sincere, right? Gu Huayu's face turned crimson and she beat Luzikin with her fist angrily. Luzikin reached out and held Gu Huayu's hand, tilted his head and looked over, what? Are you angry? Gu Huayu glanced at Luzikin and couldn't help but laugh when she saw his nervous look. Miss, we have arrived at the gate of Zhuangzi. Gu Huayu said, stop here. After speaking, Gu Huayu said to Luzikin, Qinjian, let's go in. Okay. Luzikin nodded, okay. The two of them got out of the car, and Gu Huayu told Qingyu, you go in first, and I'll show Mr. Lu around. Qingyu bowed and said, okay, I understand. Luzikin stood at the entrance of Zhuangzi, looking up at the powerful four words Minjiao Villa. Elvizakin asked, is this written by Mr. Gu? Gu Huayu smiled and shook her head, no. Luzikin said, no, who wrote it? It's powerful, and the writing power is full of perseverance and courage. It's very well written. Gu Huayu had a proud smile on her face. After seeing it, Luzikin asked, did you write it? Aren't you good at small regular script with hairpin flowers? Gu Huayu glanced at the four characters of Minjiao Villa and said, the appearance and body are just fine. Come on, let's go in. Luzikin pointed to the words on the door, then looked at Gu Huayu, Xiao, is this still a makeshift? Gu Huayu nodded and said, compared with hairpin and small regular script, the Yan style can only be considered as a makeshift one. Luzikin laughed. Gu Huayu repeated, let's go in. Luzikin nodded and followed Gu Huayu into Zhuangzi. Everywhere Luzikin looked, there were flowers. Luzikin stopped in surprise, then took 2 steps back to the outside of the gate, looked around, and then stepped into Zhuangzi again. Separated by a wall, it's like 2 worlds. How long did it take for Xiao to buy this village? Gu Huayu replied, Zhuangzi came to me 3 years ago. Luzikin was stunned and asked, did you come to the capital 3 years ago? Gu Huayu did not answer Luzikin's words, but only said, 3 years ago, I had dozens of Zhuangzi's land deeds. I was afraid that I would not remember them, so I named them Minjia Villa, and the Zhuangzi's structure and layout were all the same. Dozens of Zhuangzi, bought at the same time, where did you get so much money? Luzikin asked in surprise. Gu Huayu pointed to the road on the right, Qinjian, go this way. Gu Huayu took Luzikin through the rose garden and asked, does Qinjian know about the Dragon Mark Order? Luzikin nodded, well, I've heard of it, the symbol of the Dragon Shadow Guard family leader. It is said that Huasu had been looking for the Dragon Mark Order back then. Gu Huayu continued, then do you know that Huasu is already the commander of the Dragon Shadow Guard, why is he still looking for the Dragon Mark Order? Luzikin shook his head and said truthfully, I don't know. Gu Huayu looked around and said, these Zhuangzi are all Lunjiang guards. Luzikin asked, does Zhuangzi know these things only if he has the Dragon Pattern Order? So Huasu has been the commander for 10 years, but he doesn't know these. Gu Huayu shook her head, I don't know how much he knows, but I'm sure he knows a little. Luzikin nodded, let me tell you, he has already become the commander, so why has he been tracking down the whereabouts of the Dragon Mark Order? Gu Huayu nodded and said, Huasu knew that the Dragon Mark Order appeared in Shishan. He thought that the Dragon Mark Order was on Huabo and Sui Er's hands. Zhu Gongfang from the old house has been to Shishan. The old priests from the old house only obey orders from the head of the family who holds the Dragon Pattern Order. So, Huasu killed the old priest in the old house, and then framed Uncle Hua and Sui Er. The situation found by Luzikin is roughly the same. Asked, actually, the Dragon Pattern Order is not in the hands of Huajia and Suji, right? Gu Huayu nodded, yes, the Dragon Pattern Order is in my hand. Before my mother died, she handed me and the Dragon Pattern Order to my father and mother, and said that after I finished my hairpin, I would let my mother and father take care of it. Leave the Dragon Pattern Order to me. Luzikin asked, Huajia and the others are in Shishan to protect you. Gu Huayu shook her head, no, at first, Uncle Hua and the others didn't know about my existence. When you went to Shishan, it was also the first time I went to the county town with my father. I met Uncle Hua in the county town. Uncle Hua saw that I looked very much like my father and began to doubt my identity. Later, my father-in-law and mother-in-law handed over the Dragon Pattern Order to me in advance. Therefore, I got the inheritance left by my ancestors. These Zhuangzi are part of the ancestral heritage. Luzikin looked at Gu Huayu and asked, you look very much like Uncle Hua. Gu Huayu said, Uncle Hua said that I am 8 parts like my father and 2 parts like my mother. Luzikin thought for a while and said, Xiao, before you find out the truth, you should be more careful when you go out. Gu Huayu understood what Luzikin meant and nodded, yeah, I've thought about this too. From now on, I'll put on makeup when I go out. Let's go to the top of the mountain to have a look. Gu Huayu took Luzikin to the top of the mountain, and the afterglow of the setting sun turned the sky orange. Xiao, it's so beautiful here. Well, there is no hustle and bustle in the city here, it is quiet and beautiful, I like it very much. Gu Huayu stood beside Luzikin, looking into the distance and said. Luzikin turned his head to look at Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu was looking at him sideways, their eyes met. Gu Huayu said with a smile, Qinjian, happy birthday. Luzikin held Gu Huayu's hand and said softly, thank you. I am very happy today. I have a gift for you. Gu Huayu smiled playfully at Luzikin. Luzikin let go of Gu Huayu's hand and raised his eyebrows, really? What gift? Gu Huayu took out 2 exquisite brocade bags from her sleeve pockets and handed them to Luzikin. What is this? Luzikin asked as he took the brocade bag. Open it and take a look, Gu Huayu said with a smile. Luzikin weighed it in his hand, opened the small one first, and took out a bottle of perfume from it. Smiled and said, Xianglu. Gu Huayu nodded, this is specially prepared for you. There is only one bottle in the world. It has your taste. Lu Ziqin felt very happy after hearing Gu Huayu's words. He eagerly opened the lid and saw that it was different from Nuaniang's design. How to use this? Gu Huayu took it and pressed the nozzle. With a chi sound, the scented dew floated in the air like mist, like a scented rain. Like this, if you press it lightly, the fragrant dew will spurt out. Ziqin took it and took a closer look, this is very special. How is it done? Gu Huayu replied, it is designed using the principle of pressure. This is a nozzle. You can try it. Lu Ziqin pressed it gently, and the fragrant dew spurted out immediately. Because the opening was facing the sleeve, all the fragrant dew sprayed onto Lu Ziqin's sleeve. Gu Huayu reminded, there is a small hole here, take a look and aim it when spraying. Lu Ziqin sprayed it again and looked at it carefully. Gu Huayu was worried that Lu Ziqin would delve deeper into the perfume bottle, so she changed the topic and said, the name of this bottle of perfume is Beloved. Beloved, what's your name? Lu Ziqin asked. Gu Huayu raised her head and looked at Lu Ziqin, what? Isn't it good? Ziqin shook his head, very good. I like it very much. Thank you Xiao. Gu Huayu looked at another brocade bag and said, there is another one, open it and see if it suits your liking. Ziqin put away the fragrant dew and opened another brocade bag. Lu Ziqin looked at his watch and looked at Gu Huayu in confusion, Xiao, what is this? Gu Huayu took the watch over and put it on Lu Ziqin's hand, this is a watch. When I was in Hangzhou, I met a friend who went to sea. He brought it back from overseas. The one you have is just the same as the one I have. Pair, also known as couple watch. As she spoke, Gu Huayu rolled up her sleeves and let Lu Ziqin see the watch on her wrist. Except for the different sizes, the dials were exactly the same. The corners of Lu Ziqin's mouth couldn't help but turn up, what is this called? Couple's watch. Gu Huayu nodded, there are only two in the world, one for you and one for me. Lu Ziqin nodded and said, this is good, what's the use of it? Gu Huayu explained, wear it, no matter where you are, you only need to look at it to know what time it is. This is more accurate than an hourglass. Lu Ziqin looked at it carefully in surprise and said, so magical. Gu Huayu nodded, looked at her watch, and said, it's Shenmo now. Let's go back now. It will take about a quarter of an hour to get to the yard. Lu Ziqin raised his hand to his ear, listened carefully, and asked, is this the sound of it moving? Gu Huayu nodded, yes, this is the sound of gears turning. There are many gears here. Ziqin asked, can you open it and take a look? Gu Huayu shook her head, this cannot be opened without professional tools. Moreover, this is a precision instrument. It will be difficult to assemble it back after it is forcibly opened. Ziqin nodded, Xiao, thank you for your gift, I like it very much. Gu Huayu said, it's getting dark, let's go back, have dinner and return to the city. Lu Ziqin nodded, and the two of them came down from the mountain and returned to the courtyard. Gu Dichang led everyone to the door. Lu Ziqin stepped forward and bowed his hands in greeting. After greetings, Gu Dichang let Lu Ziqin into the room. After dinner, they sat together and drank 2 cups of tea. During this period, Gu Huayu talked about Gu Jingliang's apprenticeship. After hearing this, Gu Dichang and Wan Shi bowed to Lu Ziqin again to thank him. Gu Huayu looked at the time and said, Mom and Dad, it's time for us to go back. Lu Ziqin stood up and said goodbye. Gu Dichang and Wan Shi sent them out. Wan Shi pulled Gu Huayu behind and asked, Xiao, what's going on between you and Mr. Lulu? Gu Huayu had no intention of hiding it and said truthfully, we like each other. Gu Huayu saw that Wan had something to say, and roughly knew what she wanted to say, so she said first, I want to avenge my parents first before I can think about marriage. Master Lu also knows that he will wait for me. Don't worry, Grandma, I know what I'm doing and I won't make any mistakes. Wan Shi nodded, that's good. Once you avenge Mr. Hua and his wife, and recognize your ancestors and return to the clan, your status will be the same as Mr. Liu's. Gu Huayu said with a smile, even if you don't recognize your ancestors and return to the clan, your daughter must be talented, good-looking, rich, well-behaved, and smart. My daughter herself belongs to a top wealthy family and should not be underestimated by anyone. Gu Huayu talked nonsense and dissipated all the worries in Wan's heart. Yes, 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 my Xiao family is a top wealthy family and cannot be looked down upon in the slightest, Wan Shi said with a smile. Farewell to Gu Dichang and Wan Shi, they got into the car and Qingyu drove back to the city. As the car reached the official road, Lu Zikan reached out and held Gu Huayu in his arms, and said softly, Xiao, I must have done all the good things in my last life. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 186. Chapter 186 is right. Gu Huayu asked softly, why do you say that? Lu Zikan said, God was so moved by me that he sent you to me in this life. Gu Huayu smiled. There were no lights in the carriage, and lanterns were hung at the four corners outside the carriage. The light from the lanterns shone through the curtains, allowing each other to see each other's faces. Lu Zikan stroked Gu Huayu's hair and said, this is the first birthday I have ever celebrated in my life, and it was Xiao and you who celebrated it for me. After hearing this, Gu Huayu felt inexplicably heartbroken. Gu Huayu looked at Lu Zikan and said, from now on, I will celebrate every birthday of yours with you. You will also celebrate my birthday with me, okay? Okay, Lu Zikan responded with a smile. Qingjian, tell me about your childhood. Okay, Gu Huayu asked. Lu Zikan nodded, okay, my mother said that I was born prematurely, so I have been in poor health and frail. Qingyu first sent Lu Zikan to Qing guest residence. Lu Zikan reluctantly got out of the car and stood at the door watching the carriage go away. He didn't turn around until he could no longer see the carriage. Master is back. Rugjuan came out to greet him. Lu Zikan looked at Rugjuan, nodded, and asked, what happened? Rugjuan followed behind and said as he walked, the uncle is here. He has eaten a lot of wine. It seems that he is not in a good mood. Lu Zikan stopped, turned around and asked, how long did it take for you to come here? Did you deliver a letter to the government? I just arrived at the end of the year. Ruhi just drank the sobering soup for the uncle and didn't have time to send a letter to the mansion, Rugjuan replied. Lu Zikan frowned slightly and asked, how can such a good person drink wine? Rugjuan shook his head, younger ones don't know. Zikan ordered, send someone to go back to the house and inform me. Tell me that your eldest cousin is with me and will go back later. The Ye family is a very light drinker and would get drunk after eating a bowl of sweet fermented eggs. Therefore, the Ye family does not drink alcohol lightly. People who know each other well know this. Ye Minghao and Ye Mingqin only drank tea and did not know how to drink wine when attending cultural gatherings. Rugjuan bowed down and turned around to do the order. For example, when Ji saw Lu Zikan pushing the door open and coming in, he bowed to greet him. Lu Zikan looked at Ye Minghao, who was sleeping on the soft couch, and asked, how is it? Ruhi replied, it won't be long after you drink the sobering soup. You need to wait for a while. Zikan looked at Ming Xian and asked, how come my cousin is drinking so much today? What happened? Ming Xian said with a confused face, Hui Liu Yi, I don't even know. Yesterday, I suddenly told my wife to arrange a blind date for him. MRSK was so happy that she immediately sent someone to deliver the post to MRS Zhang at the house of the Minister of Industry. MRS Zhang sent someone to reply to her post in the afternoon and asked our wife to have tea at the tea house next to Jinming Pond later today. Lu Zikin looked at Ye Minghao and asked, "Is the eldest cousin gone?" "I went and had a conversation with MRS Fu Er by the Jinming Pond. Later, the two ladies paid the second lady, and our husband went to the Chang'an restaurant nearby for dinner. After sending MRS Zhang and MRS Fu away, the master told his wife that he had something to do with Mr. Six, so he asked his wife to go back first. After my wife returned home, our husband turned around and went back to the restaurant to have some wine. Lu Zikin looked at his eyes and scolded him, "He eats wine, and you just let him eat it, and you don't know how to persuade him." Mingzin replied aggrievedly, "I also wanted to persuade you, but I drove you out of the room and wouldn't let you get close to me. How can I persuade you?" Lu Zikin ordered, "Go and get some water and wash him." Mingzin retreat. Lu Zikin said to Ruhi, "Go and get some clothes for him to change." Ruhi turned around to get his clothes. Soon, Mingzin came in with water and stepped forward to clean Ye Minghao. After a lot of trouble, the Xing decoction also took effect. Ye Minghao woke up, looked up and saw Lu Zikin, and cried out in pain, "Qinjian." Lu Zikin waved his hand, and Ruhi left with Mingzin. Lu Zikin poured a cup of tea for Ye Minghao and said, "Why do you still eat wine when you know you can't drink it?" Ye Minghao felt bitter in his heart and said with a wry smile, "It's okay to get drunk once in a while." After saying that, Ye Minghao picked up the teacup and drank it all in one gulp. Because he drank so fast, he choked and coughed. Lu Zikin poured him tea again and said, "Why are you in a hurry? Drink slowly." Ye Minghao nodded and stopped talking. Neither of them spoke. Lu Zikin poured the tea, and Ye Minghao drank the tea until the whole pot of tea was finished. Lu Zikin said, "You are full of water, don't drink it. Since you can't let it go, why bother yourself?" Ye Minghao raised his head, looked at Lu Zikin in surprise, and said, "Do you know why I drink wine?" Lu Zikin met Ye Minghao's gaze and asked, "Is it difficult to guess how frustrated you are in love?" Ye Minghao stretched out his hand to touch his face and asked, "Is it obvious?" Lu Zikin sighed, "How do you say you are nice? You don't do things properly." Ye Minghao lowered his head and said nothing. Lv Zikin tapped the table with his hand and asked, "How do you plan to end it?" "Marry the second lady and come in." Ye Minghao raised his head and looked at Lu Zikin, "But I don't have her in my heart." "You don't have anyone in your heart, so you still go to provoke them?" Lu Zikin asked. Ye Minghao leaned back, put his hands on the backrest, and looked at the floor with unfocused eyes. "I wanted to cut the knot quickly, so I asked my mother-in-law to arrange a blind date. However, my heart aches when I think that the person I will be with day and night in the future is not her. Qinjian, tell me, have the men of the Ye family been cast by spells? Why can others fall in love with each other, but not the Ye family? Once it enters the heart, everything in the heart and eyes is filled with her, and it can only be her." Seeing his painful look, Lu Zikin comforted him and said, "Don't be sad. It's just a blind date, not a marriage. It's not too late." Ye Minghao shifted his gaze to Lu Zikin and said frustratedly, "How late is it? She only sees you in her eyes and can't see me at all." Lu Zikin looked at Ye Minghao with a half smile, and said, "Since you know she has me in her heart, you still keep her in your heart? Tell me, when did she fall into your heart?" Ye Minghao glanced at Lu Zikin guiltily, "Didn't you hide when you saw her? What? Do you like her?" At the last sentence, Ye Minghao looked nervous. Lu Zikin felt a sour breath hit his face and said, "You don't have to worry about this. First tell me, when did she fall in your heart?" Ye Minghao sat up straight, picked up the water cup and took a sip of tea, and said, "When you were hiding in Hongcheng, she couldn't find you, so she was secretly sad there. I thought it was difficult for the little girl, so I took her around Hongcheng to relax with her. Perhaps because we had spent more time together, I had a different feeling for her. You have to ask me, when did she fall into my heart? I can't tell myself. It must have been a long time. After Ye Minghao finished speaking, he picked up the cup and prepared to drink tea, but found that there was no water in the cup. Lu Ziqin pushed the cup in front of him and said, I haven't drunk it before. Does she know your affection for her? How can I let her know? What will she think of me if she knows? Besides, she is thinking about you, Ye Minghao blurted out. The latter sentence was spoken very quietly, but Lu Ziqin still heard it. Lu Ziqin looked at Ye Minghao and then asked, how long has she stayed in Hongcheng? 2 years. Ye Minghao nodded, yes, he is coming back to the capital with us. She lived in Ye Mansion for the 2 years she was in Hongcheng. Ye Minghao replied, of course, if she doesn't live in Ye Mansion, where will she live? In Hongcheng, she is not familiar with the place, so she just wants to live outside. We don't worry. She is a girl living alone outside. If something happens, how can we explain it to Shi Mansion? Lu Ziqin nodded, well, that's the case. Have you ever thought that if she can go to Hongcheng alone, why can't she return to the capital alone? Also, why did she stay here when she knew I was not in Hongcheng? Oh, yes, why did she stay? Ye Minghao pondered. Lu Ziqin continued, if it was to find me at first, but what happened later? On the anniversary of my grandfather's death, I returned to Hongcheng and told everyone that I was going to travel. She knew I wasn't in Hongcheng, why didn't she leave? And he won't return to Beijing during the Chinese New Year. Ye Minghao became more energetic, Qinjian, what do you mean? Lu Ziqin rolled his eyes at Ye Minghao and said, I don't mean anything. If I were you, I would tell her about today's blind date. Ye Minghao's eyes suddenly brightened, then dimmed again, Qinjian, I understand what you mean, but if she... Ye Minghao looked at Lu Ziqin, but did not say the next words. Seeing that Ye Minghao was hesitant and worried about gains and losses, Lu Ziqin said, the day before yesterday, after you left, Xiao said that you two are a good match. Really? We were the right ones. How did Miss Gu know that? What was wrong? What? Yamei knew you were next door and rushed over excitedly. I couldn't stop shouting. Ye Minghao's voice gradually lower. Lu Ziqin said, I don't know how Xiao figured it out. Xiao said that you treat Miss Shi-san differently. She was indeed right. What else did Miss Gu say? Have you told Miss Gu that Shi Yamei has been in love with you for many years? Ye Minghao asked. Xiao said that Miss Shi-san looks at me like a little girl chasing stars. She also said that I am the white moonlight in the heart of a little girl chasing stars. I don't understand what a star-chasing girl is, and Xiao didn't explain much. He only said that Miss Shi-san likes me admiringly, but she doesn't really like me. But Miss Shi-san's eyes are different when she sees you. Ye Minghao sat up straight and looked at Lu Ziqin earnestly. Qinjian, is what you said true? Miss Gu really said that? Lu Ziqin nodded and said, really? Let me tell you, Xiao has been running the shop since she was very young, and she is very accurate in judging people and things. She said you are right, so you must be very right. Ye Minghao nodded and murmured, women are careful, and Miss Gu is in business, so she should be very good at observing words and emotions. Qinjian, I listen to you and tell Yamei about today's blind date. If she cares about me, given her temperament, she will definitely take action. If she doesn't care, I... At this point, Ye Minghao couldn't continue. Lu Ziqin took over the words, if she doesn't care, then just find a way to make her care. Ye Minghao nodded repeatedly, yes, if she doesn't care, I will try to make her care. LV Ziqin stood up and said, let's go when you figure it out. Ye Minghao asked, where to go? Luzikin said, "Don't look at how long it will be before you go back and prepare to kneel in the ancestral hall. Also, don't you want to end what happened today? Just wait to be scolded by your aunt." Ye Minghao stood up angrily. "Oh, impulsiveness is the devil." Luzikin smiled and said, "It's also a good thing. At least it allows you to see your own heart clearly." Ye Minghao nodded. Yes. The two brothers returned to Qingqiu Duke's mansion together. The next day, Luzikin took Gu Chengliang to the residence of Grand Scholar Yang. Grand Scholar Yang asked Gu Chengliang several questions face to face. Gu Chengliang answered them one by one, and academician Yang was very satisfied. On that day, Grand Scholar Yang accepted Gu Chengliang and held a simple apprenticeship ceremony. After receiving the letter, Gu Dichang rushed back from Zhuangzi and went to the door to express his gratitude to Master Yang. Since then, Gu Chengliang went to the Yang family school to study every day. Sui Er bought the shop on Daowen Street, and Huida bought two adjacent shops opposite Baofeng Bank on Zima Street. Gu Huayu has been running between Daowen Street and Zima Street these days, communicating with the craftsmen about decoration matters. On the 3rd day of May, the British government held a crowning ceremony for Luzikin, and all the governments close to him came to watch the ceremony. Zhang Che specially took a day off and went to the British government office early, where he met Li Cheng on Qingyuan Street. After the two of them bowed their hands in greeting, Zhang Che reined up his horse and walked to Li Cheng's side, walking side by side with him. "Qing Chuan, I want to ask you something." Li Cheng turned his head to look at Zhang Che and said with a smile, "You and I don't need to be polite. If you have anything to say, just ask. I promise to tell you everything." Zhang Che leaned toward Li Cheng and said, "Are you familiar with Miss Gu that I met at Fan Tower that day?" Li Cheng looked at Zhang Che and joked, "What? Love at first sight?" Zhang Che smiled, neither admitting nor denying, and just said, "I think that girl is extraordinary, let me ask about it." Li Cheng smiled and said, "This is the 3rd time I have seen Fan Lu today. The first time I met Miss Gu was on the street of Hongcheng. I have told you about the scene that day. The second time I saw her was 2 days before returning to Beijing in Hongcheng. I went to a cultural gathering in Chang'an restaurant and met R Yuan, the boy from Qinjian, so I went to say hello to Qinjian and met Miss Gu there. Although I have met Miss Gu 3 times, I haven't talked to her much, so I don't know her well." Zhang Che nodded and then asked, "Sai Wen seems to be very familiar with her." Li Cheng nodded, "Yes, Sai Wen thinks Miss Gu is very good. He treats Miss Gu as a friend and protects Miss Gu in everything." Zhang Che asked, "Will Sai Wen come over today?" Li Cheng shook his head, "I don't know about this, I shouldn't be able to come. Sai Wen didn't write yesterday's article well, so he was punished by the teacher to rewrite it. He was guarded by the teacher, and he couldn't go anywhere." Zhang Che said sympathetically, "It's so difficult to think about it." Li Cheng smiled and said, "You still sympathize with him? You didn't read the article he wrote, and you almost made me angry." Zhang Che asked curiously, "What did Sai Wen write?" Li Cheng shook his head and said helplessly, "Sir, I will give you an assignment to write a policy essay on the importance of respecting teachers." End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the Lucky Girl from a Farm Family. Author, He Would Fire Every. Chapter 187. Chapter 187 Support. After hearing this, Zhang Che said, "This should be easy to write. What did Sai Wen write? It made Mr. angry." Li Cheng shook his head and sighed. At the beginning, he asked, "What is a teacher? What does it mean to respect a teacher?" A teacher's duty is to teach, and resolve doubts. As a teacher, you should not treat students differently based on who is flattering, who is respectful, or who gives generous gifts to his teacher during holidays. How can teachers gain respect from students if they cannot treat everyone equally? Zhang Che said, "Si Wen said it well. How many gentlemen these days are unworthy of their moral integrity? What's wrong? Your husband feels offended. Li Cheng glanced at Zhang Che and said, what's good? Let's just say respect and flattery. How do you know whether others are sincere or fake? Isn't this the knowledge of how to deal with people? I'm too young to think about it, too impulsive, and too extreme in looking at problems. Sir, I'm not offended. He is my father's friend. Be strict with him. The young man Hequan reminded, Sir, Commander Hua is here. Li Chengal stopped his horse, turned around and looked behind him, and saw Huafu's motorcade approaching. Hua Ruiming saw Li Cheng and Zhang Che and bowed his hands to them in greeting. After Zhang Mansion declined the marriage with Hua Mansion, the Lu family did not want to see people from Zhang Mansion. Hearing the greetings between his son and Zhang Che, he urged impatiently, Brother Ming, it's getting late, we have to go in quickly. Hua Ruiming cupped his hands towards Zhang Che and Li Cheng and said, I'll go ahead and see you later. Li Cheng and Zhang Che stepped aside and said, see you later. After the Huafu's motorcade passed, the Xian Wangfu's motorcade followed. Li Cheng and Zhang Che stepped forward to pay homage to the wise king. The wise king raised the curtain and said, you two are here too, let's go together. At the entrance of the British Duke's mansion, Lu Zixun and Lu Xiren greeted the guests at the door. Seeing the carriage from Prince Yen's palace, the two men rushed to greet him. After the two parties greeted each other, Prince Yen asked, where is Zikin? Lu Zixun complained, I don't know where to take a break. His crowning ceremony has burdened us here. I don't know what my grandfather thought. It was just a crowning ceremony and it was necessary to mobilize people like this. Back then, my crowning ceremony was the only one in the clan. An elder arrived. Lu Xiren glanced at Lu Zixun and changed his words with a smile, Fifth Master, please come from inside. Huanzi, please come from Qing Chuan. Lu Zixun received Lu Xiren's look and realized that he had said too much, so he changed his words, Your Majesty, Huanzi, Qing Chuan, Wenda has just arrived. Lu Xiren ordered, you stay here and I will lead the prince and others in. Several people followed Lu Xiren into the British Duke's mansion. Lu Xiren explained as he walked, because my uncle was at the border and could not attend Zikin's crowning ceremony, my grandparents were worried that Zikin would feel uncomfortable, so they made a special trip. They set up the ceremony a few days ago. The ceiling, utensils, crowns and clothes were all prepared by my grandfather. The wise king nodded, I know that my grandfather treated Zikin very well. Reaching a crossroads, Zikin leaned forward and said, Your Majesty, please come this way. After receiving the letter, the British Duke led everyone to greet him. After greeting each other, he embraced the wise king and walked inside. Li Cheng and Zhang Che looked at each other and slowed down. Li Cheng asked, Why don't you follow? Zhang Che smiled and said, It seems a bit unnecessary for us. Let's go and look for Qinjian. Li Cheng smiled and said, Let's go this way, to Shuiyingyuan. The two of them turned into the laurel forest. They were no strangers to the British government. From here they passed through the laurel forest and then passed through a peach forest before arriving at Shuiyingyuan. Do you think the eldest lady will come back today? A voice came from the pavilion. Are you right? Today is a good day for Mr. Lu. Do you think the eldest lady will come back? Another voice sounded. I heard from people in Rongan Hall that the old lady didn't want to hold a crown ceremony for the sixth master. She did it because the eldest lady hadn't been back for a long time. What's the meaning? If the eldest lady comes back today, the Duke of the country will announce in public that he will be adopted under the name of the eldest lady. Adoptive uncle. Then what if the eldest lady doesn't come back? If the eldest lady does not come back, the old lady will divorce the eldest lady on the grounds of filial piety. In this case, it's very difficult for the eldest lady to come back or not. Who says it's not the case? In this mansion, I think the eldest lady and the sixth master are the best. Keep your voice down, for those of us who are servants, any master is fine, do you understand? Zhang Che and Li Cheng looked at each other with shock in their eyes. The two of them left quickly and came out of Gishishulan. Li Cheng said, "Let's." Zhang Che waved his hand and said, "This is a household matter of the British government. We can't help. Let's go to Shuiying Garden first, meet Qinjian, and tell him first so that he knows what's going on." Li Cheng nodded, and the two of them quickly went to Shuiying Yuan. Daong saw you two and was busy greeting you. The young man saw the opportunity and went into the house to report. After a while, Lu Zikin came out to welcome them. After bowing his hands in greeting, he let the two of them into the house. Lu Zikin poured tea for the two of them and asked, "Why are you here?" Zhang Che replied, "I saw you were not in the banquet hall, so I came here. Qinjian, Qing Chuan and I just heard something, and we don't know whether to take it seriously or not." Lu Zikin put the teacup in front of the two of them and said, "How many years have we been friends? If you have anything to say, just tell me." Zhang Che looked at Li Cheng and raised his eyebrows. "You tell it?" Li Cheng said, "You just have to say it." Zhang Che stopped delaying and repeated what he heard. Yuan looked at Lu Zikin and asked, "Sir, what should we do next?" Lu Zikin thought for a moment and said to Yuan, "Go and tell your mother, she knows what to do." Yuan bowed and stepped back. Lu Zikin bowed his hands to Zhang Che and Li Cheng, "Thank you." Zhang Che asked in confusion, "Why did the British father adopt Xiren into your grandma's name?" Lu Zikin smiled bitterly and did not hide it, in order to inherit the title of the British Duke. Li Cheng asked in confusion, "What? Aren't you the one who should inherit the title of the British Duke?" Zhang Che glanced at Li Cheng and said, "Will Mrs. Yang be willing?" Li Cheng nodded belatedly, "Yes." Zhang Che asked worriedly, "Are you prepared?" Lu Zikin shook his head and said, "I disdain that title. I just don't want my mother to be offended." Zhang Che nodded, "I understand. Grandpa said that with your ability, sooner or later you will join the cabinet and pay homage to the Prime Minister." Lu Zikin smiled, leaned forward and said, "Thank you, Prime Minister Zhang. It's almost time, you go over first." Li Cheng and Zhang Che knew that Lu Zikin had his own arrangements and did not bother them much, so they stood up and left. "Okay, we'll see you soon." After the two left, Ruhi asked, "Sir, what should we do if the old lady makes trouble in public?" Lu Zikin said calmly, "There are few people who have nothing to do and are unworthy of their children and grandchildren, so they are expelled from their homes." Ruhi's eyes lit up, "Yes. I understand, little one. Sir, Manager Du has sent someone to urge him. He said that the auspicious time is coming. Please come over." Daong came in and reported. Lu Zikin nodded, "I understand." Lu Zikin took a few boys to the main hall. Du Bin was standing at the entrance of the corridor waiting. When he saw Lu Zikin approaching, he greeted him with a smile, "Sixth Master, please follow me." Lu Zikin nodded, "We have Uncle Lao Du." Du Bin looked at the polite Lu Zikin and sighed inwardly, wondering what the Duke was thinking. How could he choose an uncle if he didn't choose such a good child? Lu Zikin looked at Du Bin, who was stunned, and shouted, "Du Bo, let's go over." Du Bin came back to his senses and said, Okay, let's get over it." Du Bin led Lu Zikin to the steps of the main hall and said, "Master Six is waiting here." Lu Zikin nodded and said, "Okay." As soon as Lu Zikin finished speaking, he saw the servants of the concierge rushing over, leaning towards Du Bin and saying, "Manager Du, hurry up and report to the Duke, the holy driver has arrived at Quipping Road." After hearing this, Du Bin was stunned for a moment, and then immediately ordered, "Set up the incense case, open the middle door, and prepare to receive the driver." The servants went to prepare immediately. Du Ben went to report to the Duke of Guo. As he walked up the steps, he said to Lu Zikin, Master 6, go to the gate to pick up the Holy Master first. The British Duke hurriedly led everyone to the gate. The advance guard was already standing solemnly around the Duke's mansion. When the Emperor's dragon chariot stopped at the gate, everyone knelt down to greet the Emperor. The Emperor got down from the dragon chariot and said, Everyone loves you. I heard that Zikin was holding a crown ceremony today, so I came over to join in the fun. Isn't it an auspicious time? The British Duke and Lu Zikin knelt down to thank him. The British Duke bowed and said, It's not a bad time to return to the Emperor. Your Majesty came just in time. Your Majesty, please. The Emperor stepped into the Duke's mansion, and everyone followed behind him. The Emperor's general Lu Zikin called to his side and asked, Who will crown you? Lu Zikin shook his head, leaned forward and said, Back to the Emperor, I don't know that everything today is arranged by my grandfather. The Emperor nodded and said, I will crown you in a moment. Lu Zikin wanted to kneel down to thank him, but the Emperor caught him and said, No need to be formal. Due to the arrival of the Emperor, the original plan was disrupted and the crowning ceremony became more solemn. After the Emperor personally crowned Lu Zikin, he sat for a while before driving back to the palace. The British Duke took everyone to the gate to see him off. When the Emperor's dragon chariot left, the guests who were watching the ceremony took their leave one after another. Mrs. Yang returned to Rongan Hall and leaned on the soft couch without saying a word. Your Majesty, everyone stood by the side with their eyes and noses in mind. They were all very alert, for fear that if they were not careful, they would become the old lady's punching bag. Mrs. Li sent the guests away and came to Rongan Hall in a hurry. When she saw Mrs. Yang when she entered the door, she started to complain, Mother, tell me about her son's crowning ceremony. She sat there drinking tea and talking like a guest. I have been busy from 9 o'clock to now, and I have no time to spare. I am so busy. I wasn't that tired from the crowning ceremony between Ziran and Zigzun. I don't know, I thought it was my son's crowning ceremony. Mrs. Yang looked at Mrs. Li, sat up and asked, Have all the guests sent away? Mrs. Li sat down on the soft couch, everyone else has left. The fifth master, my aunt, the master, and Zikin and his father are talking in the study. Old Madame Yang sighed and looked up at Grandma Wang. Grandma Wang nodded and took the maid and her mother-in-law down. Seeing the servants retreating, Mrs. Li asked softly, Mother, why is the Emperor here today? Father invited the Emperor. Mrs. Yang glanced at Mrs. Li, frowned, and reprimanded in a deep voice, Can you use your brain? Who dares to issue a post to the Emperor when organizing a crown ceremony for their children? Mrs. Li lowered her head and whispered, Then why did the Emperor come to our house today? Speaking of this, Mrs. Yang became very angry. But that person was the Emperor, someone she didn't dare to offend. Even if she was upset, she could only endure it and didn't even dare to complain. Why? Support that evil obstacle, Mrs. Yang gritted her teeth and picked up the teacup angrily. So, the matter of Ziran's adoption cannot be mentioned today, right? Asked Li. Mrs. Yang took 2 sips of tea, looked at Mrs. Li and asked, Today, the Emperor came to crown the evildoer, and pushed the Duke's mansion to the top of the waves, letting everyone in the capital look at us. In the eyes of this joint, how to mention it? Li asked worriedly, What should we do? Just forget about Ziran's adoption. Mrs. Yang snorted coldly, Forget it? Impossible. The Duke's mansion must belong to Ziran. You can't even hope to get the slightest bit of that evil. Hearing Mrs. Yang's answer, Mr. Li put down the stone hanging from his heart. He raised his hand to wipe the corners of his eyes and said, It is Ziran's blessing that Ziran has a mother who has plans for him. My daughter-in-law would like to thank her mother on Ziran's behalf. Mrs. Yang patted Mrs. Li's hand and said, Thank you for what? Xiran is Lao Shen's grandson. If Lao Shen doesn't plan for him, who will he plan for? Second aunt, the second lady and the old lady are talking in the house. Mrs. Yang looked at the door and asked in a loud voice, Zi Chu is here? Come in quickly. Mrs. Yang turned to look at Mrs. Li, don't worry about this. I have my own plans. You can take care of the affairs in the house. Li Shifushan said, thank you mother, my daughter-in-law will obey her mother's instructions. Mother Wang lifted the curtain, bent her knees and said, second aunt, grandma, please come. Lv Zikiu entered the house and paid homage to Mrs. Yang. Ms. Li looked at the door and asked, are you alone? Where is your mother-in-law? Did you let her go back alone? She went back first and asked me to stay and wait for brother Ming. Lu Zikiu sat next to Mrs. Yang and casually returned to the Li family. Mrs. Li lowered her face and reprimanded, how many years have you been married into the Hua mansion? Why are you still saying that brother Ming is older than brother Ming? Husband and wife should respect each other as guests. Brother Ming is your husband, you must respect him. Being lectured by Li, Lu Zikiu pursed her lips in displeasure, my mother also said that we should respect each other as guests. If he respects me, I will naturally respect him. He doesn't see me in his eyes, but I still respect him, but I'm not that mean. You. Okay, Zikiu comes back once in a while, can't you say something nice? Mrs. Yang glanced at Mrs. Li. After speaking, Mrs. Yang handed a plate of almond cake to Lu Zikiu, have a try, the kitchen made it this morning. Mr. Li looked at her grandfather and grandson and hesitated to speak. Lu Zikiu reached out and took a piece of almond cake and put it in his mouth, chewed it twice, yeah, it's my favorite taste, thank you grandma. Lu Zikiu held the almond cake in his mouth and nodded vaguely to Mrs. Yang. Mrs. Yang handed the teacup to Lu Zikiu and said with a smile, slow down, be careful not to choke. If you like it, take some back with you when you go back later. Lu Zikiu thanked Mrs. Yang, thank you, grandma. Grandma loves Zikiu the most. Mrs. Yang smiled and raised her hand, sit down, Zikiu. You don't have to be polite when you come to grandma's place. You are such a sensible child, but you scold her to outsiders all day long. How can you be such a girl? End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 188. Chapter 188 Borrowing 1. Mrs. Yang raised her head to scold Mr. Li, but Mrs. Li lowered her head and did not dare to answer. Mrs. Yang chatted with Lu Zikiu for a while, then asked, how is brother Ming treating you these days? Is he still wandering around? Or is he away from home all day long? Lu Zikiu patted Momo on his hands, took the handkerchief handed over by Grandma Wang and wiped his hands. He shook his head and said, it's still the same as before. These days when I go back, they only come to my room on the first day of the new year. Usually, I don't even see other people's faces, can't see it. Mrs. Yang lowered her face and asked in a deep voice, Ms. Lu, you don't care about him? Do you let him do this? Lu Zikiu sighed and said, Grandma, I can't blame my mother-in-law. Over the years since I married into Huafu, my mother-in-law has always stood by my side and helped me speak up. Ms. Li said, it has been 3 years since we got married. Why is there still no movement in your stomach? Lu Zikiu looked down at his belly and said frustratedly, my mother-in-law also asked me to try my best. After what grandma asked me to do, I put a pillow under my body, raised my body higher, and didn't move for half an hour. Every time after finishing the work, I did as I did, but there was no movement in my stomach. Mrs. Yang couldn't see her granddaughter being sad, let me see, I can't blame you for this. Brother Ming only went to your house for 2 nights in a month, how can he get pregnant easily? Tomorrow you go to Huafu and tell Mrs. Lu that Brother Ming must go to Zikiu's house every day until Zikiu is pregnant. Old Madam Yang turned to give instructions to Mrs. Li. Ms. Li leaned forward and said, "Okay, tomorrow I will go to Huafu and bring Dr. Fang, who is good at women's medicine, over. Dr. Fang can take your pulse, prescribe a prescription, and take care of it." Mrs. Yang nodded, "This is more thoughtful. Zikiu should be kinder in front of Brother Ming. Men are just children, and you have to coax him." Lu Zikiu wrinkled his nose and said dissatisfied, "Shouldn't he be the one coaxing me?" Mrs. Yang raised her hand and poked Lu Zikiu on the head. "You girl, why are you so stubborn? Don't you think about it, why does Brother Ming like to go to romantic occasions? Can't you learn to please Brother Ming?" Lu Zikiu blurted out, "You want me to be as shameless as a prostitute to please him? I can't do that." Ms. Li glared at Lu Zikiu and scolded, "You girl, what do you mean by being shameless? You and Brother Ming are a couple who have worshipped heaven and earth. This is the love between husband and wife. Grandma is telling you that you should be mellow in your behavior and bow your head when it is time to bow your head. Who would know if you bow your head to your husband? There is no shame in knowing." Lu Zikiu looked at Mrs. Yang, then at Mrs. Li, and asked, "Grandma, Grandma, is this how you conquered your grandfather and father?" Li raised her hand and patted Lu Zikiu. "You girl, you really dare to say anything." Lv Zikiu leaned back, hid in Mrs. Yang's arms, and shouted, "Grandma, save me." Mrs. Yang smiled and patted Lu Zikiu twice on the back. "Save you? I think you deserve a beating." Lu Zikiu hurriedly stood up from Mrs. Yang's arms, raised her hands and held her head, and shouted for mercy. "Second aunt, Grandma, my uncle said that he is going back. My uncle asked my second aunt whether my grandma will go back or stay," a servant came in and reported. Lu Zikiu raised his voice and said, "Tell me, I will come back." The servants retreat. Lu Zikiu said goodbye to Mrs. Yang and Mrs. Li. "Grandma, Anayang, I'm going back first, and I'll come back to see you another day." Mrs. Yang waved her hand, "Go and live a good life. Make some almond cake for Chiu Yetu." Old Madam Yang turned to give orders to Grandma Wang. Ms. Li stood up and said, "Let's go, I'll take you out." Mrs. Yang nodded and said, "Go ahead and give Brother Ming a beating." When Lu Zikiu heard that Huaru Iming was about to be beaten, he hurriedly said, "Anayang, please talk to Grandma. There is no need to send her away. I can go out by myself." Zhiru Moruo, Li sighed, You will be wronged when you come back. I want to say 2 words, you can't bear it? What do you let me say hello?" Lu Zikiu giggled. Mrs. Yang said, "She won't let you go, so you go and do your work. At the end of the day, I am tired and want to take a rest." Li and Lu Zikiu said goodbye to Mrs. Yang. Li gave Lu Zikiu instructions all the way and sent Lu Zikiu to the second gate. She watched the carriage leave before turning around to get busy. Lu Zikiu's carriage arrived at the gate of the British government house. Ensu saw it and turned to the impatient Huaru Iming and said, "Sir, Madam's carriage is here." Huaru Iming got on his horse. "Let's go back." Huaru Iming followed Lu Zikiu's carriage on horseback and complained, "Why does it take so long?" Lu Zikiu wanted to retaliate, but thinking about what his grandmother and Anyang said, he suppressed the anger in his heart and replied softly, "I had a conversation with my grandmother, so I was a little late." When Huaru Iming heard Lu Zikiu's words, he looked at the carriage in surprise and stopped talking. Lu Zikiu saw that Huaru Iming was silent and didn't know what to say, so he became quiet for a while. Lu Zikiu leaned in the carriage, thinking about how to get Huaru Iming to go to her yard tonight. Huaru Iming thought about sending Lu Zikiu back to his house before going to Ziwishun Tower. Among the girls in Ziwishun Tower, there were 2 outstanding ones. When the car drove to Zima Street, Ensu saw Chen Shui and Lu are buying flowers on the roadside. He looked up at Huaruiming on his back and called softly, "Master." Huaruiming's thoughts were on the girl in Ziwishunlu, and he didn't hear Ensu's cry. Ensu shouted twice more, and finally stretched out his hand to pull up his clothes. Huaruiming's thoughts were disrupted. He glared at Ensu angrily and asked, "What's the matter?" Ensu glanced at the carriage and pointed toward the roadside, "Master, look." Huaruiming looked in the direction of Ensu's finger and murmured, "Shwe'er." When Ensu called for the first time, Luzikia pricked up his ears to listen to what was going on outside. When he heard Huaruiming call Shwe'er, he immediately opened the car curtain and stuck his head out to look for Chen Shui. When Luzikia saw Chen Shui, he shouted, "Stop the car." The driver responded and stopped the car. Before Huaruiming got off his horse, Luzikia had already jumped out of the car, ran straight to Chen Shui, and kicked over the flower pot in front of Chen Shui. He cursed, "You bitch, you know Brother Ming is going to pass by here today, right? So come here to block him, you shameless thing." Zima Street is considered a prosperous place in the capital. Chen Shui thought that there would be many rich people shopping here, so she moved the flowers and plants she raised here to sell. Unexpectedly, I met Huaruiming and Luzikia here, and secretly sighed that it was not good to go out. Luer protected Chen Shui behind him, looked at Luzikia and explained, "Madam, you misunderstood. My lady just wants to sell a few pots of flowers here. We didn't know that you would pass by here." "Humph, I wonder if Brother Ming will pass by here. The British government is holding a crown ceremony for Zi Qin today, and the emperor has gone there. Everyone in the capital knows about it. How dare you say that you don't know? You foxy child, you did it on purpose. Selling flowers? I think you are being pitiful. I see you selling flowers." As he said that, Luzikia kicked the overturned flower pot again. The flower pot rolled to Shiyame's feet. Shiyame raised her foot and kicked the flower pot back. The flower pot flew towards Luzikia. Huaruiming reached out and pulled Luzikia to his side. The flower pot passed by Luzikia, hit the basket in front of Chen Shui, and then fell to the ground and broke into several petals. Shiyame folded her hands on her chest and mocked, "Why does Mr. Hua allow his wife to act mischievously on the street and bully the women of the people?" Shiyame was in a bad mood these past few days and went out shopping to relax, not wanting to bump into Luzikia and bully others. The feud between Shiyame and Luzikia can be traced back to the Ping family and the Li family. Later, Shiyame liked Luzikin, but Luzikia's brothers and sisters regarded Luzikin as a thorn in their side. Luzikia spoke ill of Luzikin at various banquets, and Shiyame thought of ways to deal with Luzikia. Huaruiming looked at Chen Shui and pulled Luzikia, "Let's go back." Shiyame raised his voice and said, "Hey, you are really arrogant. You kick someone else's things and you don't have to pay for it." Luzikia broke free from Huaruiming's hand, turned around and sneered, "Compensate? I can afford to pay, but can she afford it? First ask this if she dares to ask for it." Shiyame raised her voice and said, "As you pass by the neighbors, take a good look. This noble lady dressed in gorgeous clothes and talking like a is Mrs. Lu of the Hua Mansion, and she is also the second lady of the British Duke's family. Tisk, 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 you are such a good tutor. He is full of dirty words. Mrs. Lu, you can scold me smoothly, but you have dirty everyone's ears. You don't have to be afraid of this lady. If she damages your belongings, let her compensate you. If she doesn't pay compensation, you go to Jingzhou Mansion to sue her, and we will testify for you." Luzikia sneered, "I want to see if a prostitute who cares about other people's men has the courage to go to the yamen. Let me tell you, how can Miss Shi-san speak for her? It turns out that you two are the same thing, chasing men around before leaving the court. They are all shameless things." From the upstairs window of Dichang Bank, Huada, who was watching the excitement, said to Gu Hua, "Miss Shi-san doesn't seem to be good at scolding others." Gu Huaya nodded, Well, don't worry, third sister, she's reinforcements are here. Reinforcements, where are they? Hwada asked. Gu Hwaya pointed at a few people pushing into the crowd. Two maids were opening the way in front, and the two women were protecting the woman in purple and the woman in apricot as they walked in. The two women walked to the middle. The woman in purple walked directly in front of Luzikiu, raised her hand and slapped Luzikiu twice. Luzikiu's head moved from side to side following the slap of the woman in purple. Luzikiu felt like stars were popping up in his eyes, and he froze on the spot. After beating Luzikiu, the woman in purple turned to look at Shiyame and said, "Third sister, if you encounter someone like this who speaks filthy words in the future, just hit her directly." "What nonsense are you talking to her about?" Hwada squinted his eyes and asked, "Who is this person? He is so imposing." Gu Huayu replied, "Princess Jinglian. She is the daughter of concubine Li and the sister of King Chen. She has practiced martial arts since she was a child and is a righteous person. She married Shi Heshi, the eldest son of Shi Shangshu." Gu Huayu spent a few days to get a general understanding of the powerful people in the capital. Shi Yamafu greeted her and said, "Princess, second sister-in-law." Mingzin bowed her knees and said, "Hello, Princess Jinglian." "Hello, second grandma." When the onlookers heard that she was a princess, they all bowed to her. Princess Jinglian asked, "What's going on? Who can tell me?" Mingzin took a step forward and explained the whole story clearly in a few words. After hearing this, Jinglian turned to Huaruiming and said, "Commander Hua, should you give me an explanation for this matter?" Luzikiu came back to her senses and saw clearly that the person in front of her was Princess Jinglian, and swallowed back the words that came to her lips. Princess Zhao Jinglian greeted her and said before Huaruiming could do it, "Princess, this is a household matter of the Hua Mansion. This woman is a servant of the Hua Mansion, and I only discipline my own servants." Princess Jinglian looked at Chen Shui and Luer and asked, "Are you two servants of Hua Mansion?" Chen Shui lowered her head and said nothing. Luer looked at his master, bent his knees and said, "Princess, we are not servants of Hua Mansion. Our young lady's surname is Chen and she lives in the Chen Mansion on Yulan Lane." The master and his wife passed away one after another, and life at home was difficult. The young lady was good at raising flowers and plants, so she took out the flowers and plants at home and sold them in order to exchange for some money to make ends meet. "Don't want to meet." Lu raised his head to look at Lu, and swallowed back what he said. Hwada sighed and said, "This girl Shuer is not as clever as the little maid next to her." Gu Huayu said calmly, "It's not that she's not clever, it's that she hasn't crossed her heart." Huaruiming bowed to Princess Jinglian and said with an apologetic smile, "What happened today was my fault and I damaged Miss Chen's belongings. We will compensate you according to the price." Princess Jinglian said, "It's not that I don't want to give you face. Your wife has a bad temper, has a bad mouth, and has hurt my sister-in-law too much. If this princess's sister-in-law doesn't care, let's forget about it. If this princess's sister-in-law wants an explanation, then I'm sorry, but your ladyship still has to give an explanation." Huaruiming smiled awkwardly, nodded and said, "Okay, listen to Princess Jinglian." After saying that, Huaruiming bowed to Shi Yame and said, "In the next generation, I will apologize to Miss Shi-san, and I hope that Miss Shi-san will be generous and give me some thin noodles." Hwada saw Huaruiming apologize to Shi Yame and asked, "Miss, what will Miss Shi-san do?" Hwada didn't hear Gu Huayu's reply and turned around. Gu Huayu was no longer around. Hwada looked downstairs and saw that Gu Huayu had already left the gate of Dichang Bank and walked toward the crowd. In the center of the crowd, Shi Yame was about to speak when the woman in Xing'ai beside him reminded her softly, "Third sister, Lu is from the British government after all. Father and Mr. Lu are work in the same yamen, and we see each other every day without looking up. We can't make too much trouble. Besides, my sister-in-law has already vented her anger on you, and Commander Hua has bowed her head and apologized. That's almost it? Do you understand? Shi Yame thought for a while and said softly, okay. Just as Shi Yame was about to raise her voice to reply to Huaru Iming, Gu Huayu squeezed in and greeted Shi Yame with a smile. Miss Shi, is it really you? Shi Yame looked over and greeted in surprise, hello, Miss Gu. Miss Gu greeted Shi Yamafu, straightened up and said, I was doing something at Dichang Bank. I heard the waiter said that Miss Shi was here, and I couldn't believe it. I didn't expect that Miss Shi was really here. The woman in Xing'ai asked, third sister, who is this? Shi Yame introduced with a smile, second sister-in-law, she is Miss Gu who prepared Wanju and Nuangguang. Miss Gu, this is my second sister-in-law, and this is my eldest sister-in-law, Princess Jinglian. Gu Huayu first went to Princess Jinglian to pay her respects. He bowed to second Grandma Yang again, straightened up, and said, brother, I paid homage to Grand Scholar Yang a few days ago. Speaking of which, I should respect second Grandma Yang as Sister Jing. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 189. Chapter 189 Borrowing 2. Yang Jing's eyes lit up and she asked with a smile, are you Brother Liang's sister? Yesterday I went back to my hometown to give away the holiday gifts, and I happened to see Brother Liang at my grandfather's place. Brother Liang said that he had a man who was sensible, well-behaved and good-natured. What a beautiful sister. She's really well born. Gu Huayu was blessed again. Sister Jing is a great award. Hello, Miss Gu, we meet again. Huaru Iming was secretly happy when he saw Gu Huayu and stepped forward to say hello. Gu Huayu bowed to Huaru Iming Fu, straightened up, and when she saw Chen Shui, she pretended to be surprised and said, is Miss Chen here too? Huaru Iming looked at Chen Shui, then at Gu Huayu, and asked in surprise, do you know each other? Gu Huayu smiled and nodded, yes, I have asked Shui about planting flowers and plants before. Gu Huayu stepped forward and took Chen Shui's hand, and said enthusiastically, I have wanted to come and say thank you for a long time, but I have been busy decorating the shop these days and have not taken the time. Today is a rare encounter, and Shui wants to show her respect. Let's have a meal together, okay? Gu Huayu turned around and held hands with Chen Shui, standing face to face with her back to everyone. He said in a low voice, nod in agreement. From now on, Mrs. Lu will not dare to cause trouble to you. Chen Shui looked at Gu Huayu gratefully and nodded in agreement, okay. Gu Huayu excitedly took Chen Shui's hand and shook it twice, then turned to Shi Yame and said, Princess, Sister Jing, Miss Shi together. Shi Yame was about to ask Gu Huayu to buy 2 more bottles of Wanju. She nodded and said, okay, let's go together. Princess, second sister-in-law, are you coming together? Second Grandma Yang looked at Princess Jinglian and asked her what she meant. Princess Jinglian responded readily, okay, let's come together. Gu Huayu thanked her and said, thank you Princess and Sister Jing for the honor. Then let's go to the Huixian Tower opposite, okay. Princess Jinglian nodded and said, okay. Huata stood on the edge. When Princess Jinglian agreed, he turned around and told King Yu to go to Huixian Tower to find an elegant courtyard. Gu Huayu glanced at Shi Yame, who nodded knowingly and said to Huaru Iming, Master Hua, I accept your apology. Mrs. Lu damaged Miss Chen's belongings. Should she pay compensation? Huaru Iming leaned forward and said, I will pay you according to the price. Shi Yame said, I don't understand flowers and plants. Miss Gu, can you help me find out how much these pots of flowers Miss Chen are worth? Gu Huayu was about to interrupt, but she didn't want Chi Yame to give her the right to speak. Gu Huayu took the words, pointed to the pot of flowers at Huaru Iming's feet and said, "The pot next to Master Hua is the best spring orchid. The flower shape is simple and elegant, and it is a symbol of nobility, so people compare it to the gentleman among gentlemen. A pot of flowers like this would cost no less than 1,000 taels of silver." When Mrs. Lu heard that she wanted 1,000 taels of silver, she blurted out, "A pot of broken flowers, 1,000 taels of silver." Gu Huayu looked over with a cold look. "What? Mrs. Lu doubts my professionalism. Princess Jinglian is here. Should you ask the princess to ask the gardener in the palace to estimate the price? Let me tell you, this is still a conservative price. If this pot of spring orchid is placed in the hands of a knowledgeable person, it will not be less than 3,000 taels of silver. Mr. Hua, your wife is like this, you don't want to compensate, right?" Huaru Iming leaned forward and said, "I'll apologize, Miss Gu, just say so." After speaking, Huaru Iming turned to Ms. Lu and said in a deep voice, "Shut up." Gu Huayu looked at Lu Ziqiu, then at Huaru Iming, and then said, "The pot next to Miss Chen is a plain crown lotus tripod, and its flowers are like lotus. It has the characteristics of one lode, 2 elements, and 3 oddities. The flowers are beautiful and difficult to maintain, so they are extremely precious. In Jiangnan, I saw a plain-headed tripod sold at auction for hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. Master Hua will pay you 10,000 taels of silver for this potted flower, which is considered an advantage for you." "How much?" "10,000 taels. Why don't you go and grab it?" Lu Ziqiu said angrily. Gu Huayu looked at Lu Ziqiu coldly, and said calmly, "Mrs. Lu, I told you that you should pay 10,000 taels of silver for this potted flower, which is an advantage to you. Such a precious flower has been harmed by you, but you still have the nerve to yell and scream. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it has no value. You." Lu Ziqiu's face was extremely ugly. "What are you doing? You have nothing to do at ordinary times, so read more books." Gu Huayu gave her a disgusted look. After speaking, Gu Huayu ignored Lu Ziqiu and continued, "Among these pots of flowers, these 2 are the most precious. The others are very common flowers and plants, so forget it. So, Master Hua can pay 11,000 taels of silver. Mr. Hua, are you not suspicious?" Huaru Iming nodded repeatedly and said, "No, no." Gu Huayu said, "I wonder if Mr. Hua will pay the money now or later." Huaru Iming scratched his head and said, "I didn't bring so much money when I went out." Before Huaru Iming could finish speaking, Gu Huayu interrupted, "It doesn't matter, we'll have dinner at Huixian Tower, Mr. Hua will just ask someone to bring the banknotes over." Huaru Iming nodded in agreement, "Okay." Princess Jinglian couldn't help but take a deep look at Gu Huayu and said to Yang Jing beside her, "This little girl is not simple." Yang Jing nodded, "Yes, her brother said that her knowledge is better than his." Princess Jinglian nodded. Miss Shi-san looked at Gu Huayu with admiration. She stepped forward and took Gu Huayu's hand. She did not forget to tell Huaru Iming, "We are going to eat. Mr. Hua, remember to have someone send the money over." Chen Shui was stunned on the spot, unable to regain consciousness for a long time. Luer told her that the rice vat was empty and she wanted to sell a few pots of flowers in exchange for some firewood, rice, oil, and salt. Miss Gu's few words actually made her earn 11,000 taels of silver. Seeing Chen Shui in a daze, Gu Huayu reached out and took her hand, "Shui, let's go eat." Chen Shui came back to her senses and looked down at the messy ground, "But, these." Huada said, "Miss Chen, go ahead, I will take care of things here." Gu Huayu urged, "Let's go and let Uncle Hua take care of it." Chen Shui looked at Huada in shock and murmured, "Is your surname Hua?" Gu Huayu's heart sank, but she still had a smile on her face and said, "Uncle Hua's surname is Hua, What's wrong? Chen Shui shook her head, nothing. His voice is like one of my uncles. Oh, let's go, Gu Huayu said. Huaruiming watched a group of people enter the Huixian building, looked away, and said lightly, let's go back. Lu Ziqiu said dissatisfiedly, she said she wanted 11,000 taels of silver, so you gave it to her. Huaruiming stopped, looked at Lu Ziqiu and asked, what else? Lu Ziqiu said, she is obviously trying to extort money. Huaruiming pointed at the messy ground and said, if you don't kick it, will she have a chance to blackmail me? Until now, you haven't realized your problem? It's really unreasonable. Not to be outdone, Lu Ziqiu replied, what's wrong with me? That prostitute should be scolded. Huaruiming's face darkened, it seems that Princess Jinglian's slaps were gentle. From now on, you need to think twice when you speak or act, and think about your identity. It will not only bring shame to you, but also bring disaster to the British government and the British government. Lu Ziqiu's face turned blue and white, and he couldn't say a word. Huaruiming got on his horse and said, what happened today will soon reach the ears of the Duke of Guo. If you don't want to be punished by the Duke of Guo, just stay in the Hua mansion and don't do anything else. Go back by yourself, I have something to do, so I'll go ahead. Lu Ziqiu stamped his feet and said, where are you going? Aren't you going to take me back home? Huaruiming replied without looking back, I have something to do. Lu Ziqiu was so angry that he cursed, you bastard. Lu Ziqiu finally held back what he said, stamped his feet, and got into the car while wiping tears. Shi Yamei stood by the window, watching Lu Ziqiu's carriage leave, and said with a smile, it's so refreshing today. Princess Jinglian said, I haven't seen you smile for a few days. Brother and sister, please take a look. Third sister looks so beautiful when she smiles. Please smile more from now on. Yang Jing took over with a smile, just smile more in the future. If you have any unhappy things, don't keep it in your heart. Tell us and we will give you some advice. Shi Yamei put away her smile and sat next to Gu Huayu. Princess Jinglian put down her teacup, I just asked you to smile more, why are you worried again? Three sisters, what happened to you? Feeling depressed all day? Shi Yamei picked up the teacup in front of him and took a sip of tea, then said, nothing. What about the liar? Look at your face. It's full of worries, but you still say it's nothing, Princess Jinglian said. Yang Jing leaned toward Shi Yamei and asked in a low voice, third sister, tell the truth to the second sister-in-law, is it because of Lulu? Shi Yamei shook his head. Yang Jing stared at Shi Yamei and asked seriously, really? Then why were you so distracted all day long after Lulu returned to Beijing? Huh? Princess Jinglian came over gossiping, third sister, is it because of Lulu that you tell your sisters-in-law the truth? If you really like Lulu, let's ask Grand Scholar Yang to come forward and finalize this marriage. How about it? Yang Jing took the words and said, third sister, if you really like Lulu, I will beg my grandfather soon. Shi Yamei shook his head, two sisters-in-law, I told you, it's really not because of Mr. Lu. Princess Jinglian sat back and asked, really? Shi Yamei nodded and said, that's not true. I saw Lulu a few days ago, and I think I'm a little afraid of him. Afraid of him? Yang Jing asked in surprise, when were you afraid of him? If you were afraid of him, you still chased him to Hongcheng. Shi Yamei blushed and said, that's because I'm young and ignorant. Don't mention this, okay? Yang Jing looked at Shi Yamei, third sister, tell your sister-in-law, did Lulu reject you? Did he make you sad? Princess Jinglian came over again, she must have been rejected by Lulu, so I'm embarrassed to say it. Third sister, don't be sad. I will go back to the palace tomorrow to see my father and ask him to grant you a marriage. Shi Yamei looked up at Princess Jinglian and hurriedly stopped her, Princess, sister-in-law, Please don't mess around. The sixth master has not rejected me. That's a good thing. Since Lulu didn't reject you, let him come to propose marriage as soon as possible. You are both old and have already reached the age of marriage. Princess Jinglian didn't wait for Shiyame to finish speaking and took over. Shiyame was so anxious that she didn't know what to do, so she raised her voice and said, "My good sister-in-law, the one I like is not Mr. Lu, but another person." Princess Jinglian and Yang Jing looked up at Shiyame in surprise and asked in unison, "Another person? Who?" Shiyame drooped his shoulders and said dully, "I won't say anything anymore." "Why don't you tell me?" "If you don't tell me clearly, how can I discuss marriage for you?" Yang Jing asked. Shiyame smiled bitterly and said in a low voice, "His family has already discussed marriage for him." Princess Jinglian and Yang Jing looked at each other. It turned out to be like this. Princess Jinglian asked, "Who is this person?" Shiyame shook his head. "He has already agreed to get married. It doesn't matter who he is, so don't worry about me." I was sad for a few days, and after a few days, I forgot about him. Then, can I ask my sisters-in-law to discuss marriage for me? Yang Jing asked suspiciously, "How long can I really forget about him?" Shiyame nodded, "Of course, I am someone who can afford to take it up and let it go." Princess Jinglian nodded, "I believe you for once." Miss Gu prepared Wanzhou and Nuaniang. Princess Jinglian looked at Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu leaned forward and said, "Back to Princess, yes." Princess Jinglian asked, "Where is Miss Gu's shop?" "On Daowen Street. The shop is still under renovation and will not be officially opened until the end of the month," Gu Huayu replied. "Opening only at the end of the month, can Ms. Gu order fragrant dew here?" Princess Jinglian asked. Gu Huayu responded with a smile, "Of course, the princess can use it herself or give it to someone else. What is this person's preference? The princess can tell her the request." Princess Jinglian said, "In 10 days' time, it will be my mother's birthday, and I would like to give her a bottle of fragrant dew." Gu Huayu nodded and asked, "What are your preferences, Madame Li Fei? What kind of fragrance do you like?" Princess Jinglian thought for a while and said, "The concubine has a quiet temperament and likes elegant things, especially the fragrance of orchids." Gu Huayu responded with a smile, "Okay, the daughter of the people understands. Let's go back and prepare some fragrant dew for the princess to choose. Today is the 3rd day of the lunar month. On the 8th day of the lunar month, the daughter of the people will send the fragrant dew to the princess's house." "Okay." Princess Jinglian smiled and thanked her, "Thank you." After saying that, Princess Jinglian looked at Chen Shui. "Does Miss Chen still have a plain crown and a lotus cauldron in her house?" Chen Shui leaned forward and said, "Go back to the princess, there is another basin." Princess Jinglian looked at Chen Shui with joy and asked, "Miss Chen, can you sell me the plain crown lotus tripod? My mother-in-law loves orchids, I hope Miss Chen can do it." Chen Shui was very reluctant to give up, thinking that everyone would save her from the siege, so she nodded and said, "The princess's filial piety moved the people's daughter, and the people's daughter gave the flowers to the princess, wishing the empress endless happiness and longevity." Princess Jinglian smiled and said, "I would be very grateful if you could part with me and sell it to me." "How can I let you give it away? You will suffer a little loss if you take care of the price mentioned by the lady. Sell it to this princess for 10,000 taels of silver." Chen Shui looked at Gu Huayu at a loss. Gu Huayu said with a smile, "Princess, you can accept it?" Chen Shui bowed and thanked her, "Thank you, Princess Jinglian." There was a knock at the door. Everyone looked over and Gu Huayu raised her voice and said, "Come in." Huade came in and said, Mr. Hua's servant has brought the bank notes." Gu Huayu nodded and said, "Let him come in." Huada exited, and after a while, Ensu opened the door and came in. He bowed behind everyone and presented the bank notes. "Miss Schwerer, count the coins." There are 11,000 taels of silver in total. Luer came over and took the banknote and handed it to Chen Shui. Chen Shui lowered his head and turned over it, nodded and said, "Thank you very much, it's just right." And Su bowed and said, "My father-in-law said that I am very sorry for what happened today. Your consumption here will be recorded in my father's account. I will apologize to you and please accept it." End of this chapter. The Rebirth of Space, the lucky girl from a farm family. Author, he would fire every. Chapter 190. Chapter 190 Situation. Princess Jinglian smiled and responded, "Master Hua is a sensible person. Go back and tell Master Hua that we will accept his apology." And Su was worried about the invitation because he was afraid of being rejected and would not be able to explain it to Hua Ruiming when he returned home. Now that he saw Princess Jinglian accepting the invitation happily, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. He leaned forward and said, "I won't disturb you guys anymore. I wish you all have a good time." After Ansu retreated, Shi Yamei asked, "Princess sister-in-law, why do you accept his love? We don't lack this little money." Princess Jinglian looked at Shi Yamei and said, "Isn't it good that some people are rushing to pay the money? We have no enmity with the money. You can eat people with a soft mouth, but take people with short hands," Shi Yamei replied. Thinking of Huaru Iming's fascinated eyes, she felt uneasy in her heart. Yang Jing smiled, glanced at Shi Yamei, and said, "When you go out today and meet someone who is stupid and has a lot of money, you can accept it with peace of mind, and you won't feel uncomfortable." Gu Huayu looked at Princess Jinglian and then at Yang Jing, secretly thinking, they are all human beings. And Su came out of Huixian Tower and returned to Baofeng Bank. Huaru Iming saw him coming back and asked eagerly, "How is it?" Gu Huayu agrees. And Su nodded, "Yes." Huaru Iming excitedly punched his left fist into his right hand, "Okay. Well done." And Su lowered his head and said, "Sir, it was not Miss Gu who should do it, but Princess Jinglian who should do it." After speaking, Ensu recounted the conversation. After hearing this, Huaru Iming asked, "What's Gu Huayu's expression?" Ensu replied, "Miss Gu is always smiling." Huaru Iming thought about Gu Huayu's smiling face and felt very good. He nodded with satisfaction, "I know, let people keep an eye on me. I want Gu Huayu's whereabouts. By the way, prepare some things that girls like in the carriage." And Su bowed his head and said, "Okay, I'll make arrangements right now. Again, tell Qian to take care of things, and don't allow servants to go to Yulan Lane to cause trouble again." Just as Ensu was about to exit, Huaru Iming stopped him. "Also, let someone check, where is the origin of Deswang Bank?" Ensu bowed down and waited for Huaru Iming's instructions. Huaru Iming waved his hand, "No more, go ahead." At the entrance of Huixian Tower, before Shi Yamei got into the car, she pulled Gu Huayu and said, "Miss Gu, I'll come shopping with you tomorrow, okay?" Gu Huayu happily agreed, "Okay, I'll wait for Miss Shi at home." Shi Yamei said with a smile, "From now on, you call me Yamei, and I'll call you in a whisper, okay? It's more cordial this way." Gu Huayu smiled and responded, "Okay. Let's see you tomorrow." Mingzin saw Ye Minghao approaching and reminded him quickly, "Miss, the eldest son Ye and the eldest son Ning Yuanho are here." The smile on Shi Yamei's face froze, and then she hurriedly boarded the carriage and said in a hurry, "Xiao, see you tomorrow." Gu Huayu looked at Shi Yamei who was running away, and then at Ye Minghao who was watching the carriage leave blankly, with the corners of her mouth raised. Lin Wangshu looked at the carriage leaving and asked, "Zhaifei, what's wrong? Is that the Shi Mansion's carriage?" Ye Minghao withdrew his gaze and said, "It's nothing, let's go." Chen Shui wanted to say goodbye to Gu Huayu, but Gu Huayu raised her hand and said, "Wait a moment, an acquaintance is here. Let me say hello first." Chen Shui nodded and consciously stepped aside. Gu Huayu said to Ye Minghao, "How do you do, Mr. Ye?" Ye Minghao bowed his hands to Gu Huayu and returned the greeting, "Miss Gu, nice to meet you." Lin Wangshu was amazed by Gu Huayu. Asked, "Sci-fi, who is this?" Ye Minghao introduced, "Gu Huayu, Miss Gu, this is my good friend, Lin Wangshu, the eldest son of Ningyu and Haofu." Gu Huayu said to Fu Shen, "How do you do, Mr. Lin?" Lin Wangshu returned the gift with his hands in hand. Ye Minghao asked, "Miss Gu, are you dining here?" Gu Huayu smiled and nodded, "Yes, I met Miss Shi and Princess Jinglian here by chance, and they gathered together. Mr. Ye also came here to dine, right? I won't disturb you two, I'll go ahead." Gu Huayu didn't like Lin Wangshu's unscrupulous look at her, so she left. Ye Minghao originally wanted to find out about Shi Yamei's situation indirectly, but when he saw Gu Huayu leaving, he had no choice but to say goodbye. Gu Huayu turned to Chen Shui and said, "Let's go." Chen Shui nodded in agreement and followed Gu Huayu across the street. "Miss Gu, thank you today." Gu Huayu turned her head to look at Chen Shui and said with a smile, "You're welcome. Miss Shi came to your rescue today." "I didn't do anything." Chen Shui lowered her head and said, "I don't understand why Miss Gu wants to help me, but I still want to thank you." Speaking, Chen Shui bowed to Gu Huayu. Gu Huayu reached out and took Chen Shui's hand, reminding her, "Okay, we're on the street." Chen Shui straightened up, looked around, and saw someone looking this way, and said, "I'm sorry, I forgot." Gu Huayu asked, "What are your plans next?" Chen Shui shook his head and said truthfully, "I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I'm just dawdling day by day." Gu Huayu suddenly asked, "If Huaruiming carries you into his house and asks you to be his concubine, would you be willing?" Chen Shui looked at Gu Huayu in surprise. She didn't know why Gu Huayu asked so. She thought about it and shook her head, "No." Gu Huayu has learned over the past few days that Chen Shui's admiration for Huaruiming is less than Shi Yamei's admiration for Lu Ziqin. Gu Huayu asked, "Are you not willing or unwilling?" Chen Shui met Gu Huayu's gaze and said word by word, "He won't carry me into the house. I don't want to and will not be a concubine for others." "Why? Don't you like him?" Gu Huayu had no intention of stopping the questioning. Chen Shui smiled bitterly and said, "A concubine is a slave, a thing for men's entertainment. Ada Yang holds me in my palm, letting me grow up carefree. They don't want me to be a cheap self, and I will not be a cheap yourself. I was born differently from him, and we don't belong to the right family. Before, I was too naive and took my childhood jokes seriously. This is fine now, he goes his own way and I live my life." Gu Huayu kept looking at Chen Shui and continued to ask, "Do you hate him?" Chen Shui shook her head, "I don't hate it." Gu Huayu smiled and said, "Don't hate him? It seems that you don't like him much either." Chen Shui smiled and said, "Maybe." With that said, Chen Shui took out the banknote and handed it to Gu Huayu, "Keep this as a thank you gift for saving me from trouble several times." Gu Huayu did not answer and asked, "Aren't you short of money? Why don't you keep it yourself?" Chen Shui said, "Tomorrow, I will send the plain-crested lotus cauldron to the princess's house, and I will have 10,000 taels of silver. 10,000 taels of silver will be enough for Luer and I to use for many years." Gu Huayu felt inexplicably sad when she looked at Chen Shui, who had no desires or demands. "I am not short of money. Keep these banknotes yourself. If you want to thank me, come over and help me teach them how to plant flowers and plants." Guide to plant flowers and plants. Miss Gu also grows flowers and plants, Chen Shui asked in surprise. Gu Huayu nodded and said, "I opened a rouge shop. The rouge, gouache and lotion sold in the shop are all made by myself, so I planted a lot of flowers and plants." Chen Shui nodded in agreement without thinking, is Zhuangzi far from the city? I will send flowers to the princess now, and then go to Zhuangzi, okay. Gu Huayu looked at her watch, shook her head and said, it's too late today, let's go tomorrow. I'll ask Uncle Hua to send you there, and I'll give you 50 taels of silver every month, on the 5th, 6th, 15th, and 10th of every month 6, 25, 26 vacation. I don't need to take a vacation, I have nothing to do anyway also, I don't need to pay for it, I like to spend time with flowers and plants. Gu Huayu interrupted her, I'm very grateful that you are willing to help me, how can I not pay you? People should balance work and rest, and cannot do things all day long, so they should take 6 days off every month. The general situation is like this. Uncle Hua will tell you the other details. After you deliver the flowers to the princess's house tomorrow, go to Dichang Bank to find Uncle Hua. Uncle Hua will take you to the village. Chen Shui nodded in agreement, okay, is there a place to stay in Zhuangzi? What do I need to bring there? Everything is available in Zhuangzi, you don't need to bring anything with you, just go there. How are you going back? Gu Huayu looked around but didn't see the carriage. Chen Shui said, Luer and I will just walk back. Gu Huayu turned to face Huidao, Uncle Hua, take them back and arrange a driver for her later, who will be responsible for Miss Chen's travel and safety. Huada bowed and said, you two, wait here while I drive over. Chen Shui couldn't refuse the kindness, so she had to accept it. Hua Mansion, Lu Ziqiu returned to the mansion and lost his temper. Mrs. Lu got the letter and rushed over to comfort her. After learning the whole story, Mrs. Lu took people to the Chen Mansion on Magnolia Lane. Seeing that the door of the Chen Mansion was locked, she asked her servants to smash the door. After entering the hospital, they smashed it again. Chen Shui returned home and saw that the house was in a mess, and she was so angry that she burst into tears. Luer bent down to clean it up, but Huada stopped him. Don't move yet. Luer looked at Huada blankly. Huadadeo, you can't tolerate it any longer. There needs to be an explanation for this matter. Otherwise, next time, she will come to the door to act up. You two wait outside the door, and I will report it to the official. Chen Shui shook her head, thank you, Uncle Hua, I don't have the energy to argue with them. Forget it, let's leave it at that. I'll go to Zhuangzi tomorrow and won't be back in a short time. Luer thought about the plain crown and the cauldron, and hurriedly walked into the house. After a while, Luer came out holding the orchid and said, I'm scared to death. I thought this flower was also harmed by them. Chen Shui thought of something and said to Hua Daodao, Uncle Hua, can you send me to the princess's mansion now? I'm afraid of causing trouble, so I want to send these flowers there as soon as possible. Huada nodded in agreement. Huada sent Chen Shui to the princess's residence, handed over the flowers, and then sent Chen Shui and Luer back to Yulon Lane before driving away. Huada returned to Wutong Lane and told Gu Huayu about the Chen family. After hearing this, Gu Huayu asked, did you ask about it? Who did it? Huada bowed and said, the neighbors said that Mr. Lu led someone to smash it. Gu Huayu nodded and said, the Lu family's grocery store on Chunyui Road is Liu's dowry. Tonight, people will destroy the store. The items in the shop were destroyed on the spot. Tomorrow Ms. Lu will definitely check it out after receiving the letter, asking her to break one of her legs. Hua laughed and responded, okay, I'll make arrangements right now. Huada happily left. On the other side, after the emperor left the British Duke's residence, Lu Ziqin was called to the study by the British Duke. After the wise King Huaruiming left, the British Duke sent Lu Xiren and Lu Zixun away, leaving only Lu Ziqin. Lu Ziqin asked, Grandpa, do you have something to give me? The British Duke nodded and said, today the Emperor specially came to crown you, which shows that you are very popular with the Emperor. Now in the court hall, several ministers are admonishing the Emperor to establish the Crown Prince. You know what to do next, right? Lu Zikin nodded and replied, Zikin understands. The British Duke nodded with satisfaction, the prince only likes you. If the prince is in power, he will definitely treat you well. LV Zikin nodded. The British Duke continued, among the four princes, King Chen seems to be an idle prince, while concubine Li spends all day in the palace doing flowers and plants without fighting for it. The mother and son have no intention of taking that position. Concubine Duan was once a female official in the palace, with a low status. The king of Chu had no outsiders to help her, so she was not afraid of her. Those who pose a threat to the prince are the concubines of Huaqing Palace and the king of Qi. In the palace, the imperial concubine is in charge of the rear officials and suppresses the empress in every aspect. In the court, Prime Minister Zhao is biased towards the king of Qi, Prime Minister Zhang is neutral with the king, and Zhang Silang of Zhang Prime Minister's mansion is on good terms with the prince, so there shouldn't be a big problem in trying to get Prime Minister Zhang to come over. Among the 6 departments, the Minister of Rights is still vacant, and the Minister of Punishment and officials are favored by the king of Qi. On the prince's side, only Zhu Shangshu from the Ministry of Husbandry, Liao Hong'ai from the Ministry of Works, and Shiljian from the Ministry of War did not take sides. Today I will tell you about the situation between the DPRK and China. Firstly, it will give you an idea. Secondly, it is about your marriage. Lu Zikin leaned forward and said, Grandpa, I want to make my own decision about my marriage. Pa, the British father slapped the table hard and said, nonsense, since ancient times, marriage has been ordered by parents. How can anyone make the decision on their own? Lu Zikin looked at the British Duke with wide eyes and said without giving up, I make the final decision on my marriage. Apart from that, I can do whatever my grandfather asks me to do. The British Duke raised his finger and pointed at Lu Zikin, I just praised you for being smart, so you came to have with me, right? LV Zikin repeated, I have the final say in my marriage. Impossible. You were born in the British Crown Palace, and you have been protected by the British Crown Palace since you were a child. You have to pay for the British Crown Palace. It is impossible for you to have the final say in your marriage, the British Duke said. LV Zikin was uncompromising, except for the marriage, I can agree to everything else. The British public was very stubborn when he saw it, and said in a low voice, I have also analyzed the current situation for you. The chance of victory on the prince's side is not good, and we have to find a way to win over the king. The third granddaughter of the Prime Minister, who had hairpins years ago, is a perfect match for you. With the marriage between King Lu and his family, the Prime Minister naturally sided with the prince. Zikin, you are a sensible person and you should know the importance. As long as the prince is good, we can be good. Lu Zikin shook his head and said, I don't agree with the marriage. I make my own decision in my marriage. Even though the British minister had good things to say, Lu Zikin remained unmoved. The British Duke looked at Lu Zikin angrily and said, you are so disobedient, do you want to marry that country girl? Lu Zikin's eyes darkened and he asked, Grandpa, are you asking people to stare at me? The British prince avoided Lu Zikin's gaze with some embarrassment, what do you mean, I have people watching you? You take the girl to Fanlu for a party. Silang of the Zhang family, the 2 young masters of the Li family, Brother Ming and the prince are all present. End of this chapter.